another fudsonfilm.com podcast. I am Craig Eastman. With me, Scott Morris.
Hello.
And Drew Tavendale.
Hello.
We're all in a room together this week. There's a rarity.
It's terrifying.
I don't know who these people are. Help. Send help.
One of them locked the door and we can't get out.
It's 10 Cloverfield Lane, Montrose. I am going to be your master of disaster tonight because we are talking about disaster movies, so and everything that entails, which probably isn't much. So without further ado, we should probably crack on. So then, disaster movies, an interesting genre, not necessarily one stuffed with quality and 5-star material, but an interesting one nonetheless.
A genre appropriately named, I would posit.
A genre which lends, I've forgotten the words going right out of my head that I wanted to use now.
Credence to the notion that people will watch any old
No, a genre which has salved our conscience over our intrinsic desire to see people killed in horrific and varied ways. Or is that just me?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people trying to psychoanalyse what we're getting at with disaster films and why they've been relatively enduring over the course of filmic history. Is it people obsessed with their own mortality? Is it people who just like seeing things destroyed? Do people just want to see the world burn, as Michael Caine may say about the Joker?
Yes, as we are all pretty much saying now about our current circumstance here in the UK.
Is it, or do they suggest that they want to see people battle against adversity? Although
and die. Battle against adversity and lose.
I tend to think that it's more they want to see things get destroyed, but
it's about creative deaths. That's what it's about.
And in the case of some of the films we'll cover, the death of creativity.
Yeah, wow. It's also a genre which has steadfastly refused to evolve, other than in the spectacle afforded by modern CG. It's very difficult to point to any sort of development of or advances in sophistication of narrative, of plotting in the disaster movie genre. Strip away the effects from something like San Andreas, which we'll talk about later, and arguably we've taken a huge step backwards, if anything. But we're going to talk about some disaster movies tonight anyway, for what it's worth. It's a genre which for me is a guilty pleasure. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I'm being blamed for this podcast. You should know. It's not that I'm a flag-waving member of the Disaster Movie Club, but I do kind of have a soft spot for them and their predictability on a quiet Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, well, I think initially you'd kind of floated this more as an Irwin Allen joint. And we kind of, I guess I petitioned for it to broaden it out so we could see how it's evolved over time, and the answer is
yes, it hasn't. That's backfired somewhat.
I think in maybe in some respects it's almost de-evolved, like your comments about San Andreas too, but it, like the 70s high point with Irwin Allen, some of his work, and then everything after that just got so generic and derivative. It's become worse.
Yeah, and some of the more recent ones, which some of which I'd seen in the cinema, and we'll talk about a little bit later, but which I haven't watched since, and I had a recollection of them perhaps being a little bit more sophisticated, and actually in going back and watching them recently for this podcast, I was alarmed to find that no, they're not. And that some of the highlights of the genre remain the earlier films. But yes, I suppose we can discuss that in some more depth as we carry on. So let's kick off with Scott. Do you want to say a little bit about A Night to Remember? Sort of bookends one end of the genre.
Why not? I mean, it's not the original disaster film by any stretch of the imagination. There was examples long before that, but it's certainly the earliest one we'll talk about. Yes, 1958, and it is about the Titanic, which is really about as much of a plot recap as you need. It was, at the time, and I guess more or less now, it was lauded as being the most accurate depiction that was available at the time. I think essentially that's still the case now. I think there's a few details that might not have happened, but it's more or less the case. And, you know, I was actually surprised when I went back to watch this. Well, actually, to watch this for the first time. It holds up better than a lot of the other films we'll talk about today. It's got a fairly solid central performance from the main point of view character is Charles Herbert Lightoller, played by Kenneth More, and I think it's got the sense to rely on the inherent drama of a large cruise ship sinking rather than trying to really desperately weld on love stories or anything like that. And I'm not putting that accusation at anyone, James Cameron, but I thought it was actually quite effective. It was made on a shoestring budget for this kind of film, which, if I check here, is about £500,000, which, for comparison, Vertigo's budget in the same year was close to 2.5 million, and So it's a lot of money to be a lot of difference in doing it. There's a few model shots that are a bit of a bathtub special, but the rest of the shots and the actual production design of the Titanic itself, the ballrooms, those kind of things, all look very impressive. All that holds up particularly well, and something I guess I might say quite a bit for the first half of this podcast. Even bad practical effects tend to look better than bad CG effects, which we will cover at some point in the early CG era. So it's a pretty effective film.
I think the great strength in retrospect of this movie, from what I recall of it, it's not one that I've caught up on recently, but dramatically from a recollection, actually its strength is that we're not at a point in the genre yet where we have a reliance on spectacle.
Yeah.
So there is more focus on the drama and the narrative and the performance aspect of it. There are none of the cheesy tropes really that we've come to expect of disaster movies, so it's a bit more involving from that perspective.
Yeah.
And it probably plays out. It's possibly more a rewarding film now as we look back, given the evolution of the genre, than perhaps even it was at the time, because now in comparison it almost feels like a masterpiece.
Yeah. And I think it is well crafted. There's lots of points that are actually relatively subtle, whereas when it's first starting to list, rather than anything but particular huge model shots or something, all you get is a shot of a trolley in a dining room moving a little bit. And it's quite an effective little tale of how
probably
it's
infinitely more foreboding than a big CG wave on the horizon.
Yeah. So it's got a lot of nice little craft touches through it, and of course it's just an interesting story at the best of times. It also delves into the other ships that are around it that kind of missed it, didn't get some of the telegraph signals that were being sent out, and a few other bits like that. So it's a very interesting little look at what happened around it, and not just the ship sinking itself, although that's handled well enough.
Yes.
So yes, it's certainly something that's worth taking a look at when you can track it down.
Yes. Recommended if it's of interest to you. Keeping on a seabound theme then, I suppose the first of the sort of keystone movies that we'll recognise in this genre is probably the Poseidon Adventure from 1972, and it's probably responsible for the big budget proliferation of disaster movies that have followed. So, just a brief plot recap of the Poseidon Adventure, but really, I think IMDb sums it up quite succinctly. As a group of passengers struggle to survive and escape when their ocean liner completely capsizes at sea. And this is pretty much the template for the disaster genre thereafter. Something bad happens and lots of people try and escape the bad thing. In this instance then, the Poseidon, which is, if I recall at the time, supposedly the largest seagoing liner, is on its maiden voyage when...
It's on its final voyage.
Oh, it's on its final voyage, sorry, when it's capsized by a rogue wave. And that's about all there is to that. The first of the disaster movies really to introduce any kind of big names and rely on a selling itself off the back of a star cast. So you have Gene Hackman and Ernest Borgnine, Shelley Winters, of course, famously, Red Buttons, Roddy McDowall, so on and so forth. I'm actually, of the films we'll talk about tonight, I'm probably the most fond of the Poseidon Adventure, and it's actually the only one that I ever owned on DVD. I've got a real soft spot for the Poseidon Adventure, and I'm not sure what it is. It is very predictable now, but I think you have to view that through the lens of, yes, well, we're so familiar with the genre, whereas at the time, this was appreciably something a bit different. Mm-hmm. And as an adventure survival movie, it's still sort of perfectly acceptable and probably dramatically still one of the better examples of the genre. Yeah,
I enjoyed it enough when I want to watch this or rewatch it fairly recently. I can't remember last time I saw it, a long time ago. Must have been on a bank holiday at some time. But yeah,
it's one of those bank holiday afternoon films, really, isn't it?
Isn't it? Just but yeah, it's kind of hinged on this performance from Gene Hackman for the most part, whose enthusiasm I think carries it.
Yes.
Another thing we'll be saying a lot, this has some of the clunkiest, worst dialogue you will see in cinematic history.
Yes,
particularly when Hackman introduces himself as his preacher character as, well, I'm angry, rebellious, or renegade. Like, that is just the scriptwriter literally telling you the plot recap of this character directly to your face.
Enough of your Facebook profile, James.
It's just reading out the dramatis personae, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm not interested in how you would like to be perceived.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. And also, some of the clunkiest dialogue delivered by Ernest Borgnine in the most shouty way possible.
Yeah.
Please stop shouting, Ernest, please. You mentioned like the star names, Craig, and I think it's Gene Hackman that's still not his best performance. Gene Hackman that carries this, but Shelley Winters actually really game. She's an entertaining character.
Yeah, and certainly a sympathetic character.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, and you just, after she dies, you feel so sorry for her husband too.
Spoiler alert.
Because there are some like real moments of humanity in it. You believe some of the relationships between the characters, although definitely not Ernest Borgnine's character, because he's basically the worst police officer there's ever been.
Drogo, yeah.
It does get addressed later, but it's like, you were supposed to be a cop and he just becomes completely useless. But so after Shelley Winters dies, and then there's a bit, and I haven't seen this in a long, long time, when you see her husband and he's trying to follow them along the walkway and they're getting high and it looks like he's going to go the wrong way and it fall off and oh no. So I feel sorry for this old guy. His wife's just died but he's still trying to get out. There is some genuine emotion in the characters. Dialogue's not great. It's entertaining. Unfortunately, I couldn't not watch this with a critical eye, and some of the stuff was driving me crazy, like the fact that the wave that topples the boat breaks at sea. Basic misunderstanding, like the entire thing's predicated on a wave and a basic misunderstanding of waves. Also, not only does this freak tsunami break at sea, it does it twice. So it reforms itself and hits the boat again.
That can happen.
And so I'm not sure this is a good idea or a bad idea. It's something I was very aware of though. During the film, the camera is constantly tilting gently side to side in case you ever forget they're at sea.
Yes.
Like, you can see the sea in some shots and they're on a boat, but no, we have to have the camera tilt like the side to side slowly all through the film. That's the main thing. I can understand why they were doing that. I just don't think it was necessary, but it stuck out to me. But some of the other stuff though, Roddy McDowall, Roddy McDowall dies midway. On the upside though, thereby saving the lives of countless innocent Scottish accents.
A bold and noble sacrifice.
I had to listen to about 4 or 5 different lines from Roddy McDowall's character before I could decide he was actually meant to be Scottish and not Irish or possibly from Pluto. But
is Roddy McDowall on a separate channel of the sound mix? Can I just pull out a jack from the back of the amp?
And there are also the other problems too. Like there's exposition chats, which are the exposition version of what you were saying, Scott, about it's like reading out the character traits.
I can forgive it that for the most part, but the genre in particular is not known for great dialogue.
Yes.
No.
And it does have, it's more for the time rather than the genre movie here, but it has those things like something happens and suddenly there's 1,000 women screaming. Like, maybe not all women would scream and that loudly, and it's like that's it. That's the job of most of the women in these films, is to scream. It's very tiresome. But certainly by no means limited to the disaster genre.
I will say, surprisingly few of them faint.
Yeah. I mean, again, I actually quite enjoyed it. I don't have the soft spot for it you do, Craig, but it's entertaining enough because it's still well produced. It's not completely over the top in way something like 2012 is. It's not just pushing up and up. It's a boat that capsizes. It's all believable enough, and the set design is fantastic.
Say, it's all practical. Obviously, all the practical effects work, and it's all on set.
I find the set really interesting, just because everything's inverted. It creates, not only does it just look visually interesting, but it gives you all these quite novel hazards to get across.
Absolutely. You see they're stepping through ceiling panels and stuff, and then even just like some of the set stuff, like the set in the last stuff, almost the final scene when they're climbing up the walkway and there's the pipe for the propeller shaft. It's a really big set and it's really impressive, but it looks believable. It's like, on that level, it's actually really interesting. But it does have that same theme or trope, I guess, really, that you're going to get in 2012 is the worst culprit of it. We'll get to that, I'm quite sure. But the water level rises and it changes speed at which it rises, but they get to the next deck and get fine, then it stops. Until they get off of it, then it rises again. It's almost like the water has read the script and knows when and where it needs to be. In this genre, it's definitely one of the high points. The set design's fantastic. Dialogue, not great, but the performances, chewing the scenery as they are sometimes, it's enjoyable and it makes the difference. When you have people like Gene Hackman and Shelley Winters, they're really entertaining to watch. You feel for the characters. I don't know if it's because, and I've said this in a few other types of films in the past, but the scale, I think, is people on a boat and you can get on with them, whereas when you have some of the disaster films where they are just
where they have the technology to destroy the world.
Because therefore it becomes too big and it's like, oh, okay.
It's more affecting when one character you at least vaguely know dies rather than when 30,000 people fall off into the ocean in a landslide. Arbitrary statistics rather than that.
And also, you know, most of these films, like, most people are going to get out, but when it comes to like they're destroying the world, but I'm figuring the film's not going to end with the world being destroyed.
Yeah.
If it's one boat, you think, well, maybe they could go with not anybody getting out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it adds that bit more tension to it.
I always think this, and we've spoken about this in different podcasts in terms of raising the stakes and what that means for emotional involvement. But it's pretty clear, especially within the disaster genre, that actually the level of potential for drama and emotional involvement from an audience is probably inversely proportional to the scale of the disaster portrayed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll note that in a few of the other movies we talk about. The other thing I really like about the Poseidon Adventure is it's got a real sort of claustrophobic feel to it as well.
Yeah.
I believe the movement of the people in these spaces, and there is a sense of the panic and the sort of the impending doom that's quite, for as throwaway a film as it is still quite palpable. And again, I think that mainly comes down to the set and the camera work and whatnot, but and the fact that obviously these people are chest deep in rising water for half the movie. It's very I'm not going to say it's like super intense, but there is that sense of confinement and claustrophobia and panic quite believable, and certainly helps propel things along, provides a good deal of momentum. So I say it's one of my favourite examples of the genre. It's one that I've got a great fondness for anyway. Whether it's technically the best now, I'm not sure whether I'd say, but I can't imagine there are many people out there who haven't seen the Poseidon Adventure by this point. It's certainly, I would say, superior to the 2006 remake of Poseidon, all things being equal, although that obviously has the benefit of Kurt Russell, which this film doesn't. I can't imagine there are many people who haven't seen it, so you probably already have your own opinion of it. But if you haven't, it's kind of one of those movies you must see.
I think if you're interested in the disaster genre, then the Poseidon Adventure is and possibly the archetype for the genre. It's again, for me, not the best. My favourite in the genre we'll get to very shortly, I think. But it gets most of the elements right. It has less wrong than a lot of it, the rest of it, and it's sort of a pretty close to high watermark of the genre. With that is not meant as a pun, but I realise now when I say it.
I forget, is this one that Irwin Allen directed himself, or is he just producing it? I know he basically does.
No, he just produced it, I think.
I mean, he's always a very hands-on producer, I expect. Whether he's credited or not, he probably directed any of the action scenes.
Oh no, actually co-director of the action scenes, yeah. You're absolutely right.
Actually, that's just one thing I want to mention, just because it's so feels so incongruous now. But Leslie Nielsen in a straight role,
it's puzzling, isn't it?
As the captain, it's so weird.
Yeah.
There's a one scene too. He's in the bridge, and let's see, he was in the airplane. He was a detective, not a captain. But he's there with the small boy asking questions. I'm like, there's just going to be a blow up doll and somebody talking about Shirley, because
I was going to say
so
at some point he's going to say, "I am serious."
Yeah,
it's a bizarre one, that. But yeah, the Poseidon Adventure, if you've any interest in the genre, then it's kind of unavoidable. We'll move on to one of the other keystones in the genre, which was 1974's Earthquake, which, as you might imagine, I guess it's probably the first of the notable earthquake movies. I'm sure it's not the first movie to have dealt with an earthquake, but dealing with an earthquake which strikes Los Angeles, causing all manner of devastation, adds at least something to the genre, in the sense that the sort of narratives over multiple locations sort of doesn't focus on one particular area or one location, but rather isolated groups of survivors in different circumstances, suffering from different consequences of the earthquake, lend it an interest that kind of pastes over the gaps in the dramatic quality or lack thereof, I would argue.
Earthquaker. Whole lot of shaking going on down there. Since I've not seen it, that's as much as I can say about it.
Earthquake is perhaps the oddest film, I think, in this list. It is strange. I mean, in most disaster films, you will spend approximately 45 seconds talking about the characterization, where in Earthquake, you get 45 minutes of it before anything in particular happens.
Yeah. And even then, I mean, let's right off the bat, it was designed as a push out for this new theatre auditorium technology, right? The sense around thing, essentially. And probably explains why dramatically it's not the most cohesive of these films or interesting, but
there's a number of characters on it. Another thing I like about this genre is you get some of the action stars with jobs that would never really mean to have action stars. So you've got structural engineer Graf, played by Charlton Heston, and a whole bunch of structural engineers, skyscraper architects, these kind of things who would not normally be seen swing over pits of fire, but that's what you get in the genre. So a lot of it's spent talking about his marriage, who's failing to Ava Gardner's character, and the affair he's having with Genevieve Bujold. And then you've got the cop George Kennedy running around town, he's on the outs with his bosses at City Hall who don't like his extreme ways. And then for some reason, stuntman Miles, played by Richard Roundtree, trying to have it. And then, of course, things kick off. A
stuntman who you would have hoped would have been the one person to have coped with the circumstance within his stride.
All the characters are like total central clearing cookie cutter things, but I still kind of warmed to them, probably because I'd watched this towards the end of the films that I was watching, so any kind of characterization at all was welcome at this point, so I was crying out.
It's almost just enough to get to name their profession.
But yeah, the film itself is strange. Like, when I went to write up these notes, the first plot keyword listed in the IMDb page for this film, called earthquake, about an earthquake, is pantyhose. Earthquake came third on the list, and now some might be disappointed that there's not quite as much earthquake action as they'd like, but there's definitely more of that than there is pantyhose.
I'm just disappointed I don't remember any pantyhose.
A lot of the problem is the effects work doesn't really hold up at all these days. They've not skimped on the number of stunt players. Possibly, I think that this might have had the record for most stunt players on set at a time or something like that.
Probably.
There's lots of them, but they're not doing anything of particular interest.
No.
Some of the wider shots sort of expose how bad the matte paintings and all that kind of stuff look, and of course
anything that shows the side of a building against the skyline with part of the building having crumbled away is oh dear. Yeah.
And of course there's that baffling decision to animate and overlay a cartoon blood splatter on a cartoon elevator
I'm so
scene.
glad you mentioned that, because that's my favourite bit of the whole film. I wanted to bring that up. Splat. It really just needed a big yellow crazy font.
A lot of it's kind of inoffensive enough. There's just lots of little oddities that don't belong. The subplot of Major Gortner's National Guard character going mad with power and rape people has no business being in here whatsoever. And for some reason, Walter Matthau gets a cameo in it in a bar, and his entire purpose is he will sit and drink in that sort of stereotypical tramp-like way. And it's kind of
taking stuff while people trip around them.
That's the thing. It's sort of funny at the start when nothing else is happening, but then later on people are actually dying around him in horrible ways, and he's just going glug 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 and then falling asleep on the bar again.
Is this Scooby-Doo?
More or less, yes. Hustling decision.
Do you know what earthquake is most notable for me now? And I remember being fascinated by it as a kid, and this might actually be the first example of a disaster movie I saw when I was much younger, and quite possibly the reason, therefore, I sort of took an affinity to it, because at that age I'm just fascinated to see, when you're a kid, it's enough just to have stuff falling apart and people getting, masonry dropped on them and stuff. Oh, that man fell down a lift shaft. That's the most graphic thing I've ever seen in my life. Can't believe I'm 8 and I'm allowed to watch this. Now that I'm an adult, the thing it's most notable for is it breaks my heart to see Ava Gardner in this, because I've always really loved Ava Gardner and I find her a fascinating character, and it's really woeful to see her here at the arse end of her career. Really sort of just, I don't know, over, a shadow of her former self in terms of her physical constitution and her perhaps more importantly, she was never the greatest actress that ever lived, but the material she's got to work with here, it's just a kind of really, it's almost just a very sad epitaph to the woman, and it breaks my heart to watch it now, but I still find some entertainment value in Earthquake. It's one of the better examples of. It's a curate's egg, isn't it? It's very strange, and I don't know. It kind of works. I mean, there's a few interesting things about it. Just a shout out to Ann Bilston on Twitter, who also thinks that this is quite an odd film. Not just Matthew, Gortner's Psycho, and some other things. The love triangle at the start has no real
analog in any other
No.
disaster film that I can think of.
No.
And it's unexpectedly downbeat ending, which I think is also an interesting thing as well, because almost every other film we'll talk about when we get to the big disastrous ones, you will have people normally sitting in front of an American flag going, yes, we shall rebuild because humanity is strong, and da-da-da-da-da. In this one, you get the doctor character turning next to the cop and say, well, she used to be a really nice city, didn't she?
Yep.
Yep. And then it ends. There's no hope at the end at all. It's like, yeah, this city's gone, isn't it?
Well, we ran out of film for the camera.
Yes.
Yeah, it is bizarre. It's a really funny note to end on. I'm not sure what the purpose of that is. It's not something I often think about, actually, the end of Earthquake, but now that you mention it, and yeah, it is quite bizarre. I'm not sure what the purpose of that is, whether, I don't know, maybe you have some theories on that and you want to email us and or tweet us and let us know what you think. But yeah, it's very, very much an oddity. But still, if you're a fan of the disaster, I'm going to say this a lot, if you're a fan of the disaster genre, it's still a fun enough movie, and I know, I would still be inclined to watch Earthquake if it popped up on a rainy Sunday afternoon.
If you like the genre and the era in particular, then you could perhaps give it a bash. It is by no means essential viewing for anyone, I would say. It's a bit bloated. Yeah, I think casual viewers could quite safely ignore this one.
Yes. Probably of more merit then in the same year, the Towering Inferno, which Drew, I'm guessing is the film you were perhaps referring to in terms of the one that you enjoy the most. Would you like to give us a little recap?
Yeah. There's not particularly any mystery to the plot here, not with any of these things, but the Towering Inferno is an inferno in a tower. There we go.
Succinct.
A new building has opened in San Francisco. It's the tallest building in the world, ridiculously tall. And Paul Newman, who's the architect of the building, begins to find out that corners have been cut by the son-in-law of the person who owns the building, and then begins to investigate a little bit. And as he's doing that, a fire breaks out and lots of people get trapped. That's it for the plot, really. Now, for me, this is definitely the high point of the disaster genre. It's probably one of the most polished. I think it's the high watermark of having the best actors in it, because it's got Steve McQueen and Paul Newman and William Holden, and some sort of interesting support from the likes of Fred Astaire, curiously enough.
Astaire, Robert Vaughn as well.
That was probably Robert Vaughn and Wagner, both of which were included for 2 lines each,
something like that. Yeah,
and then you've got
nice check if you can.
I was going to say they fancied a new car or something.
So the forever creepy looking Richard Chamberlain. So like cast wise, I think it's probably the high point. And Paul Newman alone would be enough, and it's the only person to maybe rival Hackman, but you add Steve McQueen and stuff too. You've got more. And curiously, it's when like the Poseidon Adventure is a very neat, about 90 minutes, something like that. I think this film's nearly 3 hours. But curiously enough, I didn't feel it. For me, this just sort of beats along nicely. I think perhaps because
I don't think of it as being that long either, but
no, it's 3 hours, but it really doesn't feel like it. Well, not for me, certainly. What sets it apart, I think, when let's polish the production, the model shots of the building for the most part look quite good. The actual practical sets aren't bad at all. It's the fact that you find out that it's confined space. It's a confined space. It's one building, not the whole world or a whole city or anything. It's the fact that although there's a convenience of the problem begins with a fire beginning in a cupboard, and it conveniently takes hours, despite being started with some sort of
chemical
like
or something
that, or white spirit or something. Yeah. It's the world's slowest fire up until it's convenient for it to not be slow. I think why something like, I don't know, a different genre, but something like The Day of the Jackal appeals to me so much is that when you have a character that's simply competent, it's deeply appealing. And this film has 2 in particular, although Paul Newman's the architect, he suddenly turns into electrician and handyman at the same time, although you'd imagine those are a bit beneath him. He's investigating it, he's helping organise people getting out. Steve McQueen comes in, he's the voice of soundness and reason. He's really competent, although there is one point where his firefighters wait till they're in the smoke to put in the breathing apparatus, because that's exactly what firefighters would do. That's
what they're trained to do,
They get a good lungful of smoke first.
You need to breathe in, make sure it is actually smoke before you waste any time putting your mask on.
I think it's the acclimatisation process. To fight the fire, you have to be the fire, so you have to take a big lungful of
right, exactly. Smoke. It's very method in a sense.
So nobody's panicking at the start, and you have these main characters who there's not any sort of great drama bomb dropped in that way that you so often get in other films, where it's just like it's completely incongruous. There's a fire, and fire's dangerous. Fire doesn't need anything more. Yeah, and it causes an explosion more because there's gas line. That makes sense that there'd be an explosion. There's gas in the building to power cookers and everything else. So you just have Paul Newman sort of being the voice, quite calm, and he's investigating stuff that's going on. Steve McQueen sort of just being calm. So when you watch a film like this where people are actually acting believably when they're professionals in their job, and then they've got to control other people doing stupid things, and like Richard Chamberlain just being a complete and utter and trying to steal that chair at the end.
Yeah. So you're reining that in there, remembering it's a family show. Show. What a get.
It's just, for me, just a high point because of the polish, the acting. Again, some of the dialogue is a bit clunky. Irwin Allen directed this one.
I want to say yes.
They'd stepped up to the directing chair, and Irwin Allen, like the king of the disaster genre, at least.
Oh no, John Gillerman.
It feels like it was Irwin Allen.
It feels like an Irwin Allen, yeah, but no.
He's the producer, I think.
Yeah,
it's another one. I'm sure he did the action scenes for it.
Yeah,
but,
So he seems to know what he's doing with that. Actually, those are all always competently handled. The model shows. It's got a level of polish that so many of the other films in the genre don't manage. It has the quality of acting, and again, perhaps because it's a smaller group and more relatable. But you can sort of feel for the characters at one point. And when the characters go into the lift to try and get out of the floor they're stuck on, and then that woman falls out, and you just like, and
I didn't see that coming. Yeah.
When it's 30,000 people, you just simply can't care. When it's one person falling, then
that in particular, the woman falling out of the lift at that point, I still actually find that a little bit shocking, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think
because actually when they built that character for a while, but she was there for those children, she helped the children.
It's normally telegraphed, this is a bad man. I wonder if he'll be on the kill list for this disaster movie.
Yeah, because you can see it coming to Richard Chamberlain. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
But especially because right after she'd said to Fred Astaire, I knew you were a con man. I don't care. We'll meet in the bottom. It'll be fine. And then Fred Astaire survives, but she doesn't.
Yeah.
So for me, this is a high point. I think it's one of the few of these that actually stands apart in a film its own, not just within the genre. And I must be repeating myself by saying it seems to get most things right and less wrong than pretty much anything else.
Don't really agree. I don't dislike Towering Inferno, but I think it goes on way too long. I don't think the acting's great in it at all. I think Steve McQueen and Paul Newman are spending more time worrying about their position on the credits rather than what they're actually saying.
It's just infamous for the credits. The credits.
The placement of the names on the poster.
It's saved handily by the action scenes because all that pyrotechnic stuff is just flawless. That's all great, and all that going through the fire stuff, it looks convincing peril. The model shots I don't find convincing at all anymore, but I don't particularly pillory for things like that. It's just a chronicle of the time. But the pyrotechnic work is excellent, and that really does is really its saving grace. The rest of the film, the characters are fine, but I can probably take it or leave it. I much prefer Poseidon Adventure, which is not to say I dislike. This is probably my second favourite on this list. It's still perfectly acceptable, but I believe that for me, Poseidon Adventure's the better in the Allen era. Yes, that's just my opinion, man.
All I would add to what you're saying is I probably err more towards Drew's side on this one. I agree that I think it runs far too long. It needs at least probably half an hour chopping out of it. But I would agree with Drew that I actually find it dramatically a bit more engaging, and certainly at a character level than the Poseidon Adventure. And I would. Yeah, if you put a gun to my head, I would say I prefer this over the Poseidon. I've got more of a soft spot for the Poseidon Adventure for one reason or another. But I find Towering Inferno on a filmmaking level a more satisfying film probably. But there's a cigarette paper in it.
Yeah,
I'm not going to sort of go out and wave a flag for one over t'other. But it's definitely. I think those two are definitely the best examples probably of the genre to this date. If you want to start somewhere with disaster movies, then probably Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno are an indispensable part of the lexicon.
I just don't know why Steve McQueen didn't unveil his teleporter technology that he had and everything else, because he seems to just vanish around between his movement through the fire.
Where you were going with that?
His movement
what reference have I missed here?
His movement through fire is entirely unimpeded when the script needs it to be, and otherwise
That's
it becomes
why he's such a good fireman, Scott.
Yes, he can just warp through things.
Yes.
It's great. It's brilliant.
Don't overthink it.
It's like one scene he's on the top of the skyscraper, the next he's on the bottom, then he'll go back up and between the fire.
Who are we to say he can't translocate?
Yes. Everyone else seems to have bothered getting down from there, but he's fine about it. So
as everyone up on like the 45th floor shouts down, "Tell us the secret, Steve." Yeah, no, of course, from a plot logic point of view, it's not faultless. But then, very few films in this genre we could say anything otherwise about, and some are certainly far more egregious than this. Yes. But yeah, one of the two real mastheads of the genre, I think, along with the Poseidon Adventure. So moving on then to 1979's Meteor, film that really just threatened to sink Sean Connery's career, but most other things as well. Right out of the bat, I would say Drew, I'm glad you didn't end up watching Meteor for this podcast, because I think I had evangelized it somewhat on the basis that when I last saw it, and at which point I think it was about 8 or 9, I was absolutely obsessed with this movie, and I taped it off television and must have rewatched it about 100 times. I can't remember. And so obviously I was anticipating, fantastic, I'm really looking forward to sitting down and watching this again in preparation for this podcast. Maybe it's just because I was watching it on an iPad and I wasn't getting the full experience, but I'm now seriously questioning what I was doing as a 9-year-old, that this was an exciting thing in my life.
It was good that your critical faculties got delivered sometime in the interim.
Well, it is, and it's in many ways, I'm pleased that I'm able to look back on these things and reflect and gain something from it. But yeah, so Meteor, in which Sean Connery claims an asteroid because it's not really a meteor. Scott, do you want to... let me rephrase that, Scott. Would you please?
Yeah, okay. if I must. There's a bit of a trope in films about scientists who are upset when their work is taken by the military and used for military applications, and that's what ex-NASA boffin Paul Bradley, Sean Connery's character, has. But I don't think he's got much of a case, given that he was designing an orbital nuclear weapons platform, and he is somehow surprised
for all mankind
when the military take this and use it as an orbital nuclear weapons platform. It seems it's like these were
overriding its original intended research purposes.
Yes.
It was a weapon for peace.
One of the shakier claims, I think, for when he goes in front of the Hague. But yes, he claims this was supposed to be just for defence and shooting down asteroids that are on a collision course, and this turns out to be irrelevant. He's actually brought back into NASA when they are told that one of them is heading towards them, which, if not a planet killer, would be a planet great inconveniencer. So this is essentially them trying to come up with a plan to blow up this asteroid that comes in particular. The main dramatic gist of the film comes when they run their calculations through 1979's best computer platforms available, and come up with the conclusion that they won't have enough firepower and we need to get the Russians to do one.
That's it. We know this because arbitrary green vector graphics tell us so.
Yes. Yeah. Of course, there's some political intrigue because the Americans had kept, somehow, this orbital weapons platform secret, despite the fact that it looks like a stick with a lot of nuclear weapons attached to it.
It really is.
So, somehow people looking through telescopes just missed it.
That's it. Well, I assure you it's a communication satellite.
And so eventually the Russians throw their lot in and try to join firepower to do it. Now, I think the main problem the Meteor has is that the cast, while it's an adequate cast, they have no agency whatsoever in anything that's happening.
No.
Like all they can do is go to a computer and type launch nuclear weapons, and that is their extent of involvement in the dramatic of the whole thing. And it doesn't really suffer from that. I think they kind of must have realised this and tacked on 5 minutes at the end where we better have something happen.
It's only really nominally a disaster movie because of the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, so in the last 5 minutes.
At that point, it's a typing and staring at VDU's movie.
Yeah, so basically that is the problem with it. In the last 5-10 minutes, there's a meteor strike and they're trying to get out in a kind of earthquake-like environment. However, the bulk of the film is basically people shouting at computer screens, and is as exciting as you'd expect people to be shouting at computer screens to be. It's just a pretty dull film, lots of waiting around, then watching missile platforms excruciatingly slowly rotate.
No, that was building tension.
Yes, there really is nothing of interest in this film at all.
The thing of it is, it could at least have been interesting in the sense that it's got this wonderful central premise of the game of chess that both sides are forced to play with each other to gradually unveil that the other side also has a similar platform. And how do we manage to how do we manage to work together without necessarily our governments conceding that they are working together? There's some basic political intrigue there that could have functioned on some higher level. But given that is like 90% of the movie, that such short thrift has been played to it. The thing that I like most about Meteor is that Joseph Campanella's character, General Easton, doesn't give a damn that his son dies at the start of the movie. He is so emotionally devoid throughout. I think he sort of gurns a little bit at first, maybe flinches slightly as he watches his son being killed in a spacecraft by a meteor collision or an asteroid strike on the spacecraft, and thereafter people sort of pay deference to, sorry about your son, yes, thank you, let's carry on. The whole film is so bereft of any emotional involvement. It is absolutely baffling how you can actually generate such little empathy.
The only one that seemed kind of worked up was Landau's character, one of the generals in it, who's very upset that they're kind of thinking about revealing the prospect of the existence of the weapons platform, and gets very upset and is immediately kicked out because, well, they're actually one of the few outbreaks of common sense amongst these films.
That's it, exactly.
Yes, if we don't do this, we will all die. Get out.
and a film in which you've got Henry Fonda playing the president.
Yeah.
That sounds fantastic. Henry Fonda, throughout the entire film, just basically adopts this. He looks like a man who's taken a lot of crack and then just been startled by a loud noise. He's got this weird wide-eyed really moist glazed eyes sort of thing going on. It's absolutely bizarre. I don't know what any of the thinking was behind the movie, and even at the age of 8 or 9, looking back now, I have to wonder what was going on in my life that I was engaged by this movie on any level. I think I was just fascinated by anything that was space-based. And so I'm actually incredibly glad that you didn't watch this, Drew, because I would have felt terribly, terribly guilty if both of you had wasted 90 minutes of your time.
I mean, it's not Zardoz or whatever the other Sean Connery
it's pretty close.
But it's not a high point in the man's career. And
he's not running around in a giant nappy, but that's not to say that this film is that much more redeemable than Zardoz. Yeah, it's unfortunately an entry that I can't really recommend anybody catches up with on any level, and so it probably behooves us to move on swiftly to something else.
Something equally terrible.
Or perhaps it doesn't. Now, Scott, you're a fan of The Swarm. Don't lie, you've got a soft spot for The Swarm.
It is the best of films, it is the worst of films. Mainly it's the worst of films. Actually,
whereas Meteor was so bad it's bad, The Swarm is so bad it's good.
Yes.
There's a clear distinction.
This really only made the list in the last...
I beg to differ.
I think this only got back on list because our friends at the Magic Lantern podcast,
Erica Long and Cole Relaine.
Yes, Erica Long in particular mentioned that she was a fan of how terrible The Swarm is, and so we put it on because, well, we have some history with the film from the days when we were running around in school doing Michael Caine impersonations ceaselessly.
Yeah,
that's more or less one of them. The history really is just
yes. Basically, we liked doing terrible Mark Al-Qaeda impersonations. The Swarm is about, of course, as you might expect. Well,
although before you carry on, I hadn't seen The Swarm until just a few years ago for the first time.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God! Bees! Millions of bees!
But
Echo 1 to base. Bees!
Bees!
What I was just so disappointed
Did he say
by
bees?
was one of the lines you'd both been like quoting for years isn't even in the film, and I was devastated.
Yeah, so this is perhaps where the wheels come off the genre for a
African
while.
killer bees.
We've been through fire, earth, water, and likes of airport take care of the fourth element, air as well. So the only choice for disaster then, obviously, is bees. An unlikely choice for the fifth element.
The industrious worker bee.
Yes.
Albeit of the killer African variant.
Yes, so Michael Caine steps up to combat the menace of the African killer bee largely through the medium of shouting, as top entomologist Brad Crane, who is...
Brad Crane!
That's
a stupid name for Michael Caine.
my name is Brad.
That's it. I'm Brad. No, you're not. And I want to warn you about the African killer bee.
So he is found in a somewhat unbelievable fashion in the middle of a missile silo, which has recently been destroyed by bees. And
clearly, the work of bees.
so Richard Widmark's General Slater shows up to investigate it, thus asking Michael Caine if he's American, with the response, yes. For the last 8 years, he has been American.
Which conveniently explains away my reluctance to do an accent.
Yes, so a lot of the early running is Brad trying to attempt to get the higher ups, including the president, to believe that there is actually a swarm of African killer bees, and he's very insistent that they be called African killer bees for some reason.
Because otherwise you wouldn't be worried about it. It's very important, I must reiterate, they are killer.
There's a subplot which is largely ignored towards the end, where Widmark's not trusting Crane. He gets one of his subordinates to keep tabs on him, and I take this to mean that Widmark suspects that Crane is in league with the bees, or is perhaps a bee in disguise.
Was it suggesting he is a bee?
Yes.
That's it. Maybe that's where the line is. It's all right, Widmark. I'm not a bee.
And so it goes, with Crane and the assembled scientists trying to come up with ways to kill the bees without destroying everything around it, where the bees, for some reason, slowly buzz towards Houston, killing everything in their way, because this film has no idea what a bee is or what a bee does.
But they're killer bees. They kill. So they're not in the business of making honey like regular bees.
What's especially annoying is at some point during this film, Crane gives a very impassioned plea that you shouldn't ascribe your human moralistic views to what a bee will do. And then it's clear that the only explanation for anything that happens that the bees do is because it's been written by a human with no idea of what a bee does.
Well, in fairness, it was originally about wasps. It's a search and replace.
So, like,
wasps aren't so hot right now. People are more into bees. Oh, all right. Control F. Right. Search for wasp.
There's an almost believable bit at the start where what's happening is they're up in a hive, and then someone disturbs the hive, and that's why they start going off in a swarm. But everything after that
that's a short movie.
No sense after that, because it's written by humans in a really ham-fisted way to make up the stakes, including causing an off-camera nuclear meltdown at a power plant.
Are you
suggesting it should be written by bees?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask. Are you advocating it should be written by bees?
It couldn't have been any worse.
I'm glad you mentioned the nuclear power station, because it's absolutely my favourite bit of that film, that they somehow cause an explosion at a nuclear power station by, as far as I can tell, irritating a man to flop over a console of buttons.
The self-destruct button.
Oh no, any button but that one.
Right. Yeah, so despite
so we should in fact thank our insect brethren for showing up the design flaw of a nuclear power plant that incorporates a self-destruct button.
Oh my days.
So despite a reasonable budget, its production values are of no value whatsoever, its special effects are in no way special, I think topping out with hallucinations of giant bees that their stings apparently cause, which I'm sure is 100% scientifically accurate.
But you don't think the special effects of having buckets full of freeze-dried bees and throwing them from off camera is amazing use of money?
Like, despite the nuclear meltdown, no meltdown for you on film, and nor when the order towards the end is given to burn Houston, are you getting any more than 6 boys running around in beekeeper outfits with flamethrowers. Sure, that'll work, because it's a very small place, Houston. I'm sure that's adequate to treat that particular scenario.
And it's good that the bees can't fly anywhere.
No, it's glad that we can be glad that they've got no means of escape.
So, I mean, I guess Michael Caine is treating this with the contempt that it deserves, but it's very much a low point in his career. There's a lot of films that we talk about where the dialogue's terrible. This is the worst.
But at the same time, the best.
Yes.
Oh my God! I need to put that back as a message alert on my phone. I haven't had that for a few years now.
The only other thing I don't remember much about this film. I think it's just fortunate. It's probably I've saved myself here. I think it's probably a nuclear power plant, but the coloured suits they wear just made me think of an Intel advert every time I saw them. Remember those Intel adverts where they play a funky music, white man, and always like suits? It looked exactly like that, but from like 20 years earlier.
Yes, this film is hot garbage of the lowest order, but it's actually the sort of film that I think everyone should see once, even if you're not normally the person who subscribes to ironically watching bad films.
Very much.
This really does deserve to be seen on that basis. It's
very much in the way it's important that we
movie.
teach our children about the Holocaust even these days. You know,
I know I disagreed earlier, but thinking back, it's one of those films probably is really so bad it's good. It's like, you can sort of farce watch this thing.
Special anti-thanks to whatever clown decided that home releases should be 2.5 hours long rather than the cinematic cut of 116 minutes, which is itself 115 minutes too long.
What are the differences between the home release and the cinematic print?
I assume it's much worse because there's more of it. I didn't look for a detailed cut list, no.
Well, this film needs us to be fleshed out a bit more.
We need to understand the bees' character a bit more.
We need a bit of backstory behind the bees. What's their motivation?
Maybe we see some young bees who are normally in the straight and narrow but get cultivated by some
That's right.
thuggish older bees.
We need to see how the bees are radicalised. Oh my days. Oh, I've really enjoyed talking about the swarm.
African killer bees, Black Watch.
It's much more enjoyable to talk about than watch.
Yes.
Perhaps understandably, the genre kind of died a death at this point, right?
Yes.
And it wasn't until we became a little bit more comfortable with... we got past the stage of proto-CG... Sorry, Drew.
No, I was going to say, because you're saying that the 80s more or less... No disaster movies of note, right? They're just it's gone really in the 80s.
None of any note, really. Yeah, the revival comes about with the invention of or the progression of CG from a proto state to a sort of workable solution.
Yeah.
To effects work, and I think the first example that we're going to talk about from this kind of era would be Twister, which, of all the films on this list, for me is the most soulless piece of filmmaking that we'll discuss. I somehow managed to go and see Twister in the cinema, and I've watched it again since on home formats a couple of times. I think hoping that perhaps I was wrong the first time round, desperately trying to claw back some sort of... I don't know why I'm trying to do the film any favours by by throwing it a lifeline, but honestly, I struggle a great deal with Twister, which is a shame because normally Bill Paxton is great value for money. It's one of those films where you have to assume that everyone involved was doing it because there was some other project they wanted to be involved in, and this was the one for the studio before the one for you as an actor. And it's difficult to see past the complete lack of script or emotional involvement with any of the characters. Or is that just me?
I struggle to care the slightest about any of these characters, and a lot of it's not explained. Some of the things they're meant to give you some emotional. Just as a background, you've got a team of Bill Paxton and his wife, played by Helen Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
correct.
Is leading up a team of tornado chasers who are trying to unleash some new scientific gadget into a tornado to get.
But remember, there is emotional involvement because Bill Paxton's got divorce papers with him. Helen Hunt is supposed to be signing.
That is true, and no one cares. And there's also an evil team of people trying to do the same thing for some reason. And there's clearly some history between Bill Paxton and this other guy, but thankfully it doesn't bother explaining any of that apart from having them almost fight at some point, and then, well, that's it. That's really it.
And
that's
they're evil because their little probes that they're trying to release into the Twister, the idea for which they've stolen from Bill Paxton, aren't spherical like Bill Paxton's. They're tetrahedral?
Like that.
So basically, Bill Paxton has spheroids and zeroids, and the other one have cuboids.
Pretty much.
Peter Hawk's reference there for the 4 people who remember.
It's one of those films which, shallow as it is, goes that step further and treats its audience with such disdain and such lack of confidence in their intelligence that everything is over-explained and signposted in advance in the most infantile of terms.
No, I mean, for me, it kind of delivers on its promise. It has tornadoes in it.
It does.
You can tick that one off the list. It has an airborne cow. Tick. It has tornadoes destroying thing. Tick. Which I think is essentially all the film promised, and that's what it's delivered.
True. I remember being really thinking the trailer was pretty cool for Twister, and everybody got quite excited about it, and then it just turned out to be this empty theme park ride that's a good, half an hour too long?
Yeah, like I say, I cannot care about any of the characters. I like Bill Paxton enough, but apparently not as a lead man, or not this leading man, at the very least.
I've not seen this, but I was finding Bill Paxton still more interesting in smaller roles like Hudson and Aliens, and even like the car salesman in True Lies, something like that. He struggles to carry anything as a leading man.
Yeah,
it's better as a slightly quirkier character, which is hard to take as a main role.
So it's purely an effects-led film. It's closer to a chase film than a disaster film for the most part. I guess it's an easy, at least undemanding watch, but I cannot for the life of me imagine why anyone would ever want to revisit it at this stage in the game. There's far better, more spectacular examples.
Yes, I don't want to visit it at all. And you mentioned Team Evil, and I just feel like I'd rather watch Cheryl and Soccer instead.
Yeah.
I'm just checking IMDb trivia here because I remember reading at the time a story about it, and it appears here again about the fact that when they were filming, in order to make the skies appear sufficiently dark, they had to overlight the interiors of the vehicle cabs. So they floodlit with really high intensity lights the vehicle cabs, and Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt had retinal burns because of the light they were pumping in to suitably contrast the sky.
If nothing else, right? Rather than the time you would spend watching this film, go read at least the Wikipedia page about the making of this film, because it is just a list of sheets. There's more disasters happen and more injuries happen to people on set than there was that made its way into the film. It was an absolute disaster. Well, the shooting productions, not a high point in Jan de Bont's career.
I was going to say it was Jan de Bont, right? He strikes me as such a responsible guy. It baffles me that. Listen, we'll speak about the Volcano movies in a little minute. We'll probably move on to those shortly. But one of the things that really baffles me is that a film like Dante's Peak, for any given Metacritic score, how much stock you put in that, but to some degree, they should reflect some kind of reality. And I can't believe for a second that Twister merits a Metascore of 68.
No.
And something like Dante's Peak, which is rubbish, but is markedly not as rubbish as Twister, gets a Metascore of 42 or something like that. It's absolutely baffling.
That's because
even the user score for Twister, 6.3, is at least double what it should be.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's the mistake you've made is of paying any attention to that at all. Didn't we discuss this in the Jack Ryan
we discuss
podcast?
It frequently, and we don't need to keep coming back to it, but it's that far wrong.
Yeah, it's the Andy wisdom of crowds, isn't it?
It's absolutely mental. Absolutely mental. Twister is at best a 2-star movie. If you want to go on a star rating system, this is a 2-star movie.
Out of 5, presumably.
Yes, out of 5, which is, if you want to go to 10, I'll probably. Yes, a 2-star movie. Yeah, I'm not going to waste any more time talking about it.
That's one of my favourite MPAA warnings, though. Rated PG-13 for intense description of very bad weather.
That sounds like a piss take.
As far as I can tell, genuine.
I'm trying to stir up some sort of controversy to aid the marketing. Whew. I don't believe the weather in this film. I would. It's called Twister. I love it. IMDb quotes. Square brackets. Cow flies by in the storm. Joe. Cow. Square brackets. Cow flies by in the storm.
Like beat poetry, isn't it?
Woman. Whoa, man. So probably because the sequel is finally upon us some 20 years later, we should probably touch passingly on Independence Day from 1996, I would assume, if this is the 20th anniversary. Yes. I can't back that up with paperwork.
Well, you could, but you just can't really be bothered.
Yes, yeah, I can't. I've got an iPad to my left and I can't be bothered touching it. Yeah, so Roland Emmerich's first outing into the huge-scale disaster movie genre, which he absolutely would not revisit at any point until the next time, at which point he claimed, I'm done with disaster movies, until the next one, at which point he claimed, I'm done with disaster movies, at which point he tabled Independence Day 2. So Independence Day again, is there anyone on the planet who hasn't seen Independence Day? Probably not worth a kind of plot recap. What does it bring to the genre? What does it bring to the table?
Well, I mean, as we've just discussed, there is some discussion as to whether you would put it into the disaster film genre at all. I mean, if nothing else, perhaps a slightly defining genre is this is something where a disaster is visited upon us by something you could fight rather than just a force of nature or something along those lines, which does make it different. But I mean, I think if nothing else, it is the poster child. We spoke about the CG stuff earlier, and this is clearly the poster child for the CG being the spectacle and really the driving force as to why anyone would want to go and see anything like this. The shot of the White House being alien exploded is iconic.
Which is, I think it's an overused word, I think that's fair to say.
But also model work, not CG.
That is true, but there's certainly plenty of the stuff in there that was CG.
What's surprising about Independence Day is the budget it was made on. It's one of those films where arguably the money is definitely up on screen. They made pretty good use of the budget, and although some of the stuff looks pretty ropey now, there's still some stuff in there which is halfway decent.
As I remember at the time, actually, it being described as a big budget B movie, and that's pretty accurate. Actually.
That remains probably the most succinct description of it.
At the time, it made a crazy amount of money, though.
Oh yeah, everybody had to see it, and everybody loved it. This is one of the few films that I went to see more than once at the cinema. I think. I mean, I watch it now, I kind of think, I don't think it's aged particularly well, but it's still entertaining.
It's a colossal lump of cheese, but I still enjoy it.
Yeah.
I was surprised when I watched it the other week or so. It does, for the most part, hold up pretty well. The effects were okay.
Here's the thing, I watched this and I remember finding it, I mean, it's cheesy but entertaining. And then I watched it a few years ago, and I can't remember why now. I hated it. I genuinely hated it. I remember this feeling being so angry about it and shouting at the screen. And then I watched it last week and I was like, yeah, it's all right. I have no idea what this is.
I can back it up with paperwork. I mean, it's all just the jingoism tacked together with cliches, but somehow it works because it clearly is not meant to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a completely ridiculous film because they fly up to an alien spaceship with a power Mac and plug it in some interface with us when most people can't even find the right lead. They're like, which end of this USB cable to plug into the alien spaceship here? But it is daft, but it doesn't take itself seriously.
No. And it's one of the rare cases where I think if you cast this film with anything other than Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith, it would be a disaster. But somehow those two just managed to bring every bit of charisma they've got on screen to a plot or a script that does not deserve it in the slightest. Somehow it works.
Yeah, because
there's an element of lightning in a bottle there.
Bill Pullman, who I don't really have much of an opinion of at all. He's kind of there. He's not unlikable, but he's not really got much charisma. He's just he's there. You've got George Hirsch as Jeff Goldblum's dad. He's quite entertaining. A wee bit of comic relief there. He's quite a likeable character. Other than that, the characters aren't particularly remarkable, but it hinges so much on Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum. And the fact that they are fun together, they both have a lot of charisma in whatever they're in, is what sells at that in the effects work. Although, talking of effects work, it's possibly this film that's really the progenitor for the ridiculous overuse of seeing well-known landmarks and landmark cities being destroyed, which we're all thoroughly fed up of now. Like, oh good, I've just seen New York be destroyed for the 112th time. Way. And I think Independence Day is probably to blame for the start of that.
Yeah, for once I would just like to see aliens like invade a field or something like that, you know.
And how many times can you see the Golden Gate Bridge be destroyed?
Well, once a movie, as it currently stands. Man alive. Yeah, we'll talk about that again in a couple of films' time as well. Yeah, it's good fun. I although it's obviously very light-hearted, Scott, you chose exactly the word I was going to use, jingoistic. For an international audience, even at the time, the flag-waving American patriotism was a little bit difficult to stomach. I mean, I imagine that played incredibly well on home turf, but it was, at the time, it was a little bit cringeworthy for the rest of us. But yeah, it's easy enough to see past that. There's enough humour in the film. Like you say, it does rest very solidly on the performances of Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum. If advance word on the sequel is anything to go by, then perhaps Jeff Goldblum without Will Smith isn't quite as engaging.
A question to which the answer is no thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the one interaction on Twitter from Tabs,
Assassin.
That's a tongue twister itself. Who counted Independence Day as one of their favourite disaster films. Again, also questioning whether it would actually fit into the genre. So it's clear that we're not the only ones who are questioning whether we should be doing it here. But certainly enough things blow up in it to be more or less fitting.
It certainly fits. Roland Emmerich particularly, but it certainly fits with a more modern disaster film. Of the large scale destruction, like cities being destroyed and people displaced in that way, so it fits in from there. Yeah, obviously, I mean, it's a sci-fi movie, but it's a big chunk of cheese, but it's palatable enough cheese. It's
not a blue cheese where you could handle just a little bit, but this much will make you sick. Just to really stretch out a personality there. So there you go, Independence Day. You already know what your opinion of Independence Day is. Whether or not you saw Daylight is a different matter. Now, I didn't revisit Daylight in the run-up to this, so I don't know, Drew or Scott, have you?
I can't remember if I've seen this or not.
I saw it at the cinema.
Does it have Sylvester Stallone in it?
Yes.
Is it the one that's in the traffic tunnel?
Yes.
Right, then I have A, seen this, and B, I've just told you everything I remember about it.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same for me. I'm sorry, Scott.
Yeah. Well, I watched it last week and I have probably about the same amount to add to it. It's, if nothing else, you've got to expect its brutal efficiency of its setup. Pretty much before the opening credits have stopped, you're shown an illegal toxic waste convoy and a dangerous car chase, and like two star-crossed lovers. They inevitably come together in the New York to New Jersey Holland tunnel, causing a disastrous cave-in, leaving the tunnel unstable and no longer as watertight as you'd ideally want. A disparate group of people are trapped inside a blocked-off portion of the tunnel, and after dusting themselves off, must think about getting out. First on the scene outside is disgraced ex-Emergency Medical Services Chief Kit Latura, Sly Stallone, who sets about helping people as best he can, and when the current chief is killed in another cave-in, people turn to him for guidance. He sees the plight of these people trapped in the tunnel and decides to brave a dangerous trip to meet them and try and guide them out through a warren of old, disused chambers and tunnels before the whole thing comes crashing down. Despite the difference in setting, most of the time it feels very much like it's directly channeling the Poseidon Adventure, particularly when, towards the end, when the floodwaters start rising. It's lifting from the template well enough to struggle its way up to mediocre, and with largely practical effects, that aspect holds up better than a lot of the early CG-reliant disaster films. But there's really nothing that it does that's at all above average, so much so that I can't think of anything more to say about it, so I won't.
That's probably fair enough. I don't remember Viggo Mortensen being in this.
Yeah, he's like a Roy Nord. He's the rock climber.
I was going to say, is he the one who put the rock climber who's a bit of
arrogantly says, "I know where if here I'm going to climb up here," and then is immediately crushed within the first 5 minutes. Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
it's one of those kind of rare cases where these days Viggo Mortensen, he's quite a big deal, and it would have been quite shocking if you killed off your character like that in the first 15 minutes or something of it. But of course back then he wasn't, so it was just another bit of cannon fodder for the time.
Yeah, I remember this being very, very throwaway and unengaging anyway. And I think I'd gone to see it with a group of friends at the cinema, and even walking home from there, it was hard to muster up more than 5 minutes discussion. Yeah,
I mean, like I say, it's average. There's some interesting bits. Like there's something about a refreshing absence of too much macho posturing for a lot of it.
Right.
Where Sylvester Stallone's character is not like a all-dominating alpha dog. He's open to taking suggestions and listens to people and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, nothing even remotely interesting enough to warrant anyone looking at this again. Perfectly acceptable date-night stuff, but nothing particular that you need to dig up. What was this? Was it 20 years, pretty much?
96, yeah.
Yep, after the fact, yeah, no. Give that one a miss.
Yes, moving on to 1997. Dante's Peak. The first of the movies we'll look at in the competing themes from competing studios thing that happened amongst not just disaster movies, but here in particular in disaster movies that happened in the late 90s anyway. Pierce Brosnan is a volcanologist who arrives in an idyllic town to monitor some volcanic activity, and of course is poo-pooed by his boss when he recommends putting the town on evacuation alert, because his boss's previous experience of having felt that way about an impending eruption, which didn't happen, and all it did was wreck the economic viability of the town thereafter. Of course, people probably should have listened to Pierce Brosnan, because
Hashtag trust Pierce.
Yeah, exactly. People probably should have listened to Pierce Brosnan's character, whose name completely escapes me now, Harry Dalton. Because, of course, he is right.
Yeah.
And all sorts of volcano-related nonsense thereupon happens. Very standard fare. Again, I have a fonder recollection of Dante's Peak when I saw it at the cinema than I do now, having revisited it. And I was actually a little bit disappointed at just how standard and disengaged I was by the movie. I seem to remember Pierce Brosnan being far more charismatic, and his relationship with Linda Hamilton's character, the mayor of the town, being a little bit more involving, them having a little bit more chemistry.
Yeah.
But really, there's
a waste of both of them, really, isn't it?
An absolute waste of both of them, which is a shame. And crucially, I misremembered the bit about the pyroclastic cloud. I was disappointed to go back and realise that I'd been trying to practice an impersonation of Pierce Brosnan, and I can't get anywhere close to it. I'm really frustrated. And one of the things I practice is shouting the line, "It's a pyroclastic cloud." He doesn't shout it. I've totally misremembered it. He just says it very, very calmly. It's a pyroclastic cloud. See? Nothing like Pierce Brosnan. I don't even know who it is. So I was upset about that. What's notable about Dante's Peak is there's a budget of over $110 million, if I remember correctly. I remember at the time thinking, wow, that was, for 1997, that's a big-ass budget for a movie like this. And some of the effects work, some of the CG work with the lava and whatnot holds up relatively well now.
Certainly better than Volcano. By a long way.
Oh, we'll come to Volcano. And specifically the effects work in Volcano. So some of that stuff holds up really well. However, there's a really weird thing going on where some of the other effects, and it's primarily stuff with this stuff that really sticks out, and it really takes you out of the movie and the jeopardy, especially when there are things like rubble and boulders and sort of volcanic boulders from eruptions falling out of the sky. Anything in this movie where a rock has clearly been fashioned out of styrofoam has no weight to it whatsoever. And it's literally a case of, I sat there thinking about it the other day, and I'm thinking, literally all they would have had to have done would have been to overcrank the camera a couple of frames a second so that when playing it back, slow it down a little bit, it would have had so much more weight to the... And it was a really strange nitpicky thing to pick on, but also the plot holes in this movie are absolutely baffling, as are the magically fire-resistant properties of the tyres that Pierce Brosnan has on his Toyota pickup truck. And we all know how reliable Toyota pickup trucks are, but his tyres do eventually melt in lava, but it takes him a good couple of minutes. Contrary to what I am no volcanologist, but I understand how heat works. And I've bought enough tyres in my time.
You've made enough toasted cheese to understand, basically.
Yeah, exactly, right? There are some really weird plot holes and just complete inconsistencies and nonsensicalities in this movie that when I go back and watch it now, I'm surprised at how detracted I was by them. It's by no means the worst movie we'll see on this list, but it's a real waste of the talents involved. And probably I'm not going to say don't watch Dante's Peak.
I am.
It's a 3-star movie at a push. It's north of Twister, let's put it that way. But it's by no means an essential.
Yeah, I don't hate it, but given that the main human interest comes from Dalton trying to help Wanda and the kids rescue their bafflingly idiotic mother-in-law.
Yeah.
Like, who seems to be thinking of this kind of weird magical thing. You can think of the volcano won't harm me because I'm its friend or something like that. It makes no sense at all.
I don't even think there's that much logic behind their decision to stay put.
Yeah, but like you mentioned earlier, the relationships have no charisma, and whether it is just a side effect of DVD artifacting, I mean, I suppose it's, scientifically accurate that when a volcano erupts, there will be a lot of soot in the air. But between it and it being dark, there's a 30-minute section of this film where I might as well have closed my eyes. You cannot see a goddamn thing for half an hour of this film. And that's very difficult to really care about a film that you can't actually see. Not great.
I was worried that because when I watched this recently, about a week ago or something, in preparation for this, I'd watched it on an iPad, and I thought to myself, "Oh, is it just that thing of I should have really have watched this on the biggest available screen?" So I'm glad to hear that you. You suggest possibly the problems it has or otherwise.
Yes, the spectacle is somewhat obscured when you can't actually see any of it. So yeah, it's a bit of a pain.
Some of you can see where some of that budget's gone. I could imagine a lot of it's down to location work and stuff, right, and the expense of working on location in some of these places. But there's a real sort of disparity between the top end of the work that's been done and some of the nice stuff, which still holds up well enough today, and some of the other effects work in it, which is kind of almost B movie level. And this weird thing, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Unless I missed something. The whole thing with that ELF transmitter that NASA wants them to test, for reasons that are never explained, why NASA wanted to give an ELF transmitter to some volcanologists to test on their behalf. Correct me if I'm...
volcanoes, obviously.
Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he takes he puts the lives of himself and the mayor and her 2 children at risk, going to pick up that ELF transmitter on a whim at one point, because apparently he knew in advance that he'd get stuck down a mine afterwards and would need it to help people locate where they are. Isn't that what happened?
I can't remember it well enough to really care about any of that.
I sat scratching my head for a good 5 minutes after them, like, wait a minute, what happened to causality here? What happened? How did Pierce oh, wait a minute, he's got the script. Of course he knows what's going to happen. There are some really baffling things in this movie like that make no sense. Also, can I just say, spider legs? The piss poor design of a robot designed to clamber down the steep and rocky sides of a volcanic crater, which clearly has the worst arrangement of articulation for achieving that task. Absolutely bizarre. But yeah, I was a bit disappointed because I remember at least finding this passable at the time, but there's not even really the satisfaction of any particularly spectacular deaths or anything in this movie. I think that's where it falls flat.
In fact, one person dies in the whole film.
Right.
Two.
A couple. Yeah.
Two. They explicitly say that everyone else got out safe, but one of the is Dalton's boss and the aforementioned stupid grandmother die. Oh, and there's 2
and
people
his wife at the start.
Yes.
Because remember Dalton's tragic backstory.
And come and think about it, there's 2 people in a hot spring that got unexpectedly hotter just before the main thing came out. That was one of the clues.
Lesson about sous vide.
Yes. so that's your death toll from the volcano eruption, which is quite respectable. Well done. They did their job well. They got everyone out in time. So
they did.
Fair play to Pierce Brosnan. If there's ever a volcano erupting, I want him in charge. He's done a good job.
If ever I need someone to identify for me what type of cloud something is, especially if I'm concerned it might be a pyroclastic cloud, I will call on Pierce. So come on then, Scott, let's talk about Volcano, shall we? Or Drew, do you want to talk about Volcano?
No. The Tommy Lee Jones, isn't it?
It has.
And a volcano?
It has, not in the traditional sense.
Again,
the La Brea tar pits.
This is all that I remember, and I've seen this film, but I genuinely remember nothing of it, and I have a very good memory, so
I admire you,
that
sir.
Tells me everything, because I haven't rewatched it for this.
Yes, I admire you that.
You're clearly getting rid of the least important bits of your memory to hold you more important stuff.
This, conversely, Volcano, my memories of which have always been terrible, and revisiting it thinking, it can't be as bad as I remember, only to find out it was possibly even worse.
97's other magmatic offering, Volcano. Tommy Lee Jones is Mike Rourke, the head of the Emergency Management Office, dealing with a small earthquake that triggers something much worse as a volcano, forms in the Los Angeles tar pits and starts bothering the city with lava flows. It's up to Rourke and his team to try and come up with a plan to stop the lava, minimise the death toll, and also keep his daughter safe. Part of that team is passing geologist Dr. A.B. Barnes, played by Anne Heck, and Rourke's deputy Don Cheadle, and the usual ragtag parcel of pointlessly obstructionist functionaries and obvious lava fodder. The main thrust becomes a scheme to drive the lava into the sea, which I think is called the Bridger Doctrine.
That's very Italian job.
And what lava it is.
Yep.
What crappy looking lava it is. What roundly unconvincing crappy looking lava it is.
What yellow underlit watery porridge it is.
And as the only card this film has to play is lava, it's a bit of a busted flush. Tommy Lee Jones is here doing the usual Tommy Lee Jones gruff act, which is fine, I suppose, but in no way remarkable. He and Hetch should be commended a little bit. Their double act has at least some mild chemistry, despite some of the clunkiest dialogue we'll mention in this podcast, which is not short of clunky dialogue.
No.
Science-wise, effects-wise, it's almost veering into the ironically enjoyable, but not quite. It's not bad enough to be funny or interesting, and if nothing else, we've learned that volcanoes shouldn't be seen in the cinema, because reading this in Dante speak, there's really not a lot of interest between the two. And yes, another one that you can quite safely skip over.
I am baffled by the fact that the budget of this still $90 million, so by no means a small budget, that it could look so bad.
Yes.
Especially some of that stuff with at the end with the building detonation and stuff like that, and we're like, oh my days. The only part of this film, and I remember being quite shocked by it at the time, the only thing this film has going for it is that Norm from Fargo buys it in quite spectacular style and in quite haunting fashion, actually.
Yeah.
And at least it had the courage of the conviction of killing one of its characters off in quite a brutal fashion.
I mean, I don't know if that's scientifically accurate the way that happens either, but I mean,
I don't think it's scientifically accurate either, but it's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. The other thing is that very much like Paul Giamatti in San Andreas, Don Cheadle in this film. Now, normally you could put Don Cheadle in a film and he will be the one thing that you can go, oh, well, at least Don Cheadle was good. Not even Don Cheadle's particularly good in this film. And that's not Don Cheadle's fault. That's entirely the script's fault.
Yeah.
So if even Don Cheadle can't salvage any kind of value from this whatsoever, that's probably all you need to know.
Yeah.
Really, really underwhelming, stupid film with really particularly poor effects work. Who directed Volcano again?
I'm not convinced it was.
Mick Jackson, who I can't think what other films Mick Jackson is known for.
He's just not Mick Jagger. That might make more sense.
Yeah. Mick Jackson, director of 34 movies, none of the rest of which you'll know. No. I wonder why he didn't get any work after this. Oh, he directed The Bodyguard and Steve Martin's LA Story.
So you could safely say this killed his career, which was at least somewhat promising at that point. LA Story's not bad. The Bodyguard is not my cup of tea, but
it's not
a lot of people
like
like
it. It's at least popular and it's held in some regard. Yeah, absolutely bizarre. Just a complete misfire of a movie from absolutely every conceivable angle. Very much in the bottom half of the list.
If not firmly holding the rest up.
Yes. Acting as a firm foundation. So let's go on then. So the other big piece of parity we have is between asteroid movies that cropped up around this time.
Indeed.
And that would be Armageddon and Deep Impact. So we'll talk first a little bit about Armageddon. Drew, give us a recap for those who haven't seen it.
It's Armageddon.
And given the depth that this film goes to in its plotting, I'm sure this will be a very long recap with lots of intricate details about.
I think it's going to be at least 3 or 4 words. Yeah, Armageddon. There's a big asteroid going to come and hit the Earth, and they tried to shoot out of the sky. What recap done?
Yippee-ki-yay.
Yeah. So, in marked contrast to Deep Impact, and it's kind of hard to talk about these separately, compare them mostly throughout.
Well, let's okay. So on that note, then let's do a contrast and compare. So Armageddon, Bruce Willis is a deep sea oil driller, an expert in his field, who of course naturally is sent into space to blow up an asteroid.
I mean, it's
Michael Bay directs. That's pretty much all you need to know about that. Deep Impact, which if I remember correctly was greenlit before Armageddon, but came out later, is very much more realistic take on the end of the world asteroid.
More measured, perhaps.
More measured. It's at least aiming to be
plausible.
Yes, it's at least aiming to be mildly plausible and at least a little bit more considered and realistic from that perspective. Some of the same plot elements, obviously, beyond the impending asteroid strike, but very much more interested in the human story aspect, I suppose.
Yes.
So that's I'm starting from there.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I remember at the time when they both came out, I was kind of bored probably by Deep Impact. I wasn't that impressed by it.
I was as well, yeah.
Whereas the
Armageddon blows up, yeah!
Yes, I found Armageddon, certainly from the cinema point of view, much more entertaining. The spectacle, etc., the bombast of it, it was that appealed more to me. It was just like cheesy blockbuster but fun. I very much do not feel that way now.
Well, like I say, I don't think we should underplay the spectacle that Armageddon managed to deliver, because I hadn't seen Armageddon at all until last week. It is one of the most fastly cut movies I've ever seen. I mean, I think even Michael Bay backed off after this. There is no scene longer than I think 5 seconds in the whole film. It's really
including
bang,
what he
bang,
classifies
bang,
as lingering romantic moments.
Yes, and it really is the most fastly paced bit of cinema I think I've ever seen, and it is almost overwhelming. I think Roger Ebert called it an assault rather than a film, and I can kind of see that.
I know, but compared to, say, the Transformers films, you can actually follow what's going on as opposed to no idea what's happening.
It's better crafted, but it is visually almost overstimulating. It is a direct hit of sugar. When you watch it the first time, I mean, I actually quite enjoyed it the first time because it was the first time I watched it, and it is just on that level alone of it being such a... It is one of those high octane thrill rides that you hear about so often.
It's audacious.
It really does batter out. So I don't think we can really underplay that. I suspect when I go and watch it again, I will not like it anything like as much.
Yeah, I really think, with the exception of The Rock, it's Michael Bay's best film. I know that's a bit of a backhanded compliment.
Yeah,
but
I feel like at least with this, he was aware of how ridiculous the entire plot, how ridiculous the material was.
Oh yes.
And
it is a stupid film.
The notion was that he should just rush it, not give you time to stop and think about it, which makes sense. But at the same time, just a wee bit less cocaine, Michael.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or a little bit more thought. I mean, it should not be the sort of film where someone wrote it down, Steve Buscemi has space dementia, and people went, yeah, that sounds fine, let's shoot that. Yes, and then space
dementia is possibly the most ludicrous thing I've heard in a long time, and I've forgotten about that until I was watching this film again. Space dementia. Now, kudos to William Fichtner for saying that line with such a straight face.
And a Gatling gun. In space, one of the more practical means of drilling. I can understand why you would take it.
And it's good how it works without oxygen too.
Very handy.
Right, but so back to comparing them. So a very similar premise, that in terms of similar to the dinosaurs, the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. Another similar planet killers heading towards Earth. Except
he is upon us.
It's a good comparison this to begin with, because everything in Armageddon space that turned up to 11, and it's ridiculous.
Everything blows up except the planet. Bits of the planet blow up.
Okay, so they start
just not the planet. Everything else blows up.
Both films sort of give you an idea about the meteor that's thought to have wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Thought maybe 6 miles-ish, something like that in diameter. Caused that massive crater, the Yucatan in Mexico. And so in Armageddon, in Deep Impact, they say this new asteroid that we've detected through the telescope coming towards Earth, it's about 8 miles long, a bit bigger than what they killed the dinosaurs, size New York City. Okay, but no, that's not enough for Armageddon. In Armageddon, it's the size of Texas. So that wouldn't just wipe out life, it'd probably break the planet in two.
Crack the planet.
Yes. So everything's like that. Deep Impact, they have maybe 18 months notice. So they start building a specialised spacecraft, they work things out, they prepare the safe places underneath the limestone hills in Missouri. It's a much more measured film. It's
closer to what an actual response to something like that
to a
might
degree.
be.
You have the lottery even. That makes sense, because they're not going to save everybody. They try to prepare things, they freeze prices. It's kind of thought out, actually. It's unbelievable. So you have 18 months, it's time to build the spacecraft, train the astronauts, send it, prepare
But in Armageddon, it's important for the plot that people don't think about it that much.
Yes.
I mean, it's not unique. Even Ben Affleck points out in the commentary, but just the sheer audacity of having NASA not being able to build a drilling rig, of all things, that necessitates, instead of training astronauts to drill, having drillers become astronauts in a week? A long weekend?
Everybody, But just going to time scale just now. So Deep Impact, 18 months, measured response. Armageddon, they have
18 days.
18 days, I think. It's slightly fewer than that. And 36 hours of that is lost getting these people off the oil rig in the first place.
Yeah.
They started with the fact they wanted it to be oil rig people for some reason, then worked backwards. What's the only circumstance under which there was work? If we had no time and everybody was just in such a panic, they went, whatever, it's an idea.
These highly trained astronauts who are some of the most gifted, intelligent, and physically capable people in the world. They've been trained for years, they're psychologically tested, they can turn their hand to more or less anything, but no, not good enough to teach them how to use a drill. When and NASA, it's got to say, NASA can't build a drill, but apparently they can build a space shuttle, which they just happen to have 2 of lying about, handy.
Good prototype ones.
Deep in back, they have to build one, but they've got a year and a half. 18 days in Armageddon, but no, they happen to have a couple in storage. Oh, that's good.
Ask the janitor which cupboard they're in.
It's so ridiculous that they have these. Instead of taking the astronauts and teaching them how to drill, which is going to take them a morning because they're geniuses generally, we'll take all these drug addict, criminal roughnecks and we'll send them into space instead, where they can get space dementia. That clip, Scott mentioned it. It was going around on Twitter a few weeks ago. It's from a Armageddon comedy, so it's not new, but it's deeply entertaining. Ben Affleck says he's asking Michael Bay all these questions, and Michael Bay's response is one step shy of him sticking his fingers in the ear, going, no, I can't hear you. Like, stop asking entirely reasonable questions, Ben. Shut up.
The mistake you're making, Ben, is that you think I attributed thought to this.
So, Armageddon, it's about the spectacle. What do you delivers on? It's not
the only way to handle that material in the way that's presented by Armageddon is to rush through it and try and stop the audience from thinking about anything, because now, once you've seen it once, you can hardly watch that as anything other than a comedy now.
I mean, so you've got the spectacle of like New York City being destroyed again, of course.
Oh, if a piece of pre-asteroid impact space debris is going to land anywhere on the planet, it will be on top of a landmark.
Yes.
It's not going to land out in the tundra.
They home in them.
Yes, sat nav.
Yeah. So you've got that, and then you've got the all-American heroes, and
there are a lot of stars and stripe banners flapping around in slow-mo in the backdrop of this movie. It's
very gung-ho, yee-haw, Americana stuff, but
I've got down goofy cornball antics, which seems to be about
succinct.
Yeah, because I mean, otherwise you can't buy out Owen Wilson as a person going into space to save the world, can you?
No. This was a really early role for him as well, right? And not a really early role for him, but it's the first time I think we'd seen him in a big budget production. First time he came to my attention.
Around about the same sort of time as Behind Enemy Lines.
Yeah,
no, Behind Enemy Lines was after that.
Is it?
Yeah,
that might have been 2000 or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah,
it's not far away from it, I don't think. But I mean, what sticks out for me this more is actually Ben Affleck's performance, which is. It's kind of his difficult third album status of his career, isn't it? He kind of had a good couple of turns very early on with Matt Damon, although obviously Matt Damon, history's proven, is a much more capable actor at the time. And well, Ben Affleck's now very good. He went through a phase of just putting in these bland anodyne performances. And this is one of them where Ben Affleck's character has no character.
Yeah, I think once we got to the Sum of All Fears, then suddenly the Affleck that we know now had appeared, but between Good Will Hunting and then it was
a paycheck.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You always said that with a straight face. I mean, certainly, so you've got this like rush to do it in Armageddon. It's all about just getting onto the asteroid. In that sort of part of Deep Impact, that's fairly minor. It's more sort of they get setback after setback. The asteroid bit's fairly minor, and it's all about the response of people to what's happening, how it affects society and how it affects relationship. And it's so much more interesting at that level because it's not visually exhausting for one thing. Though in Armageddon's defense, there are a few entertaining bits. I wouldn't say the same as good, but Armageddon does have Peter Stormare chewing every bit of scenery he can find get his teeth on, and it's fantastic.
It's mental.
It's so ridiculously over the top, and it's like Peter Stormare was the only, apart from maybe Steve Buscemi, the only people in the film who knew how ridiculous it was. Because Bruce Willis it's not his best performance, but he's taking it far too seriously. But Peter Stormare's just, I'm going to have fun with this and run with it. So it's not one of these films that I would dissuade anybody from watching if you've not seen it. It's daft fun, big cheesy blockbuster. It's one of Michael Bay's tolerable films, and Peter Stormare alone is just probably worth the price of admission, which is probably nothing nowadays because it'll be on a fixed streaming service. But Just running around thinking, this is ridiculous. Nobody else seems to realise I can get away with this.
Well, Armageddon is Bruce Willis and Billy Bob Thornton, and Deep Impact is Robert Duvall and Morgan Freeman, isn't it? And that's pretty much all you need to know.
Yeah.
Definitely much more considered.
The cast is so much better
film.
in Deep Impact, yeah.
Really good
James
cast.
And even like, I mean, that's what made what's so remarkable at Deep Impact is there's a Téa Leone in it, and she's not terrible. And this was maybe the year after Bad Boys or something.
That's right. And she gets a nice, at least certainly a poignant conclusion to her story arc, which is.
I mean, there's some people like Vanessa Redgrave's more or less wasted in this film, but you do have some good support from the likes of James Cromwell. Fairly minor role, but it's James Cromwell. He's always carries an air of authority. Yeah. Around about the same time as Green Mile, so I think his star was on the rise in LA Confidential, Green Mile, that sort of time. Morgan Freeman, even in Dreamcatcher, which is terrible, Morgan Freeman, it raises things a wee bit.
They get considerably more performance for their dollar Deep Impact than they do in Armageddon.
I mean, Elijah Wood is sort of one of the major characters, and he's still quite young at that point, but he's watchable enough.
Not that engaging. But
it's not awful. He's
no,
he's a teenager basically, so it's kind of hard for him to be.
It's a nice, interesting kind of story arc for him and for is it Lily Sobieski?
She's actually kind of bland in it, but does get to deliver one of the worst lines I've ever heard though, which is, "Nobody in our neighbourhood discovered a planet-killing asteroid before," more or less that. Oh, okay,
we've all been in a position to say that, sure, at one time or another. I think very much one of those things that as a hormone-addled teenager, I'm sure Armageddon, late teenager, I suppose not as hormone-addled, but Armageddon was more appealing to the senses, but now from a slightly older, more considered, twice as old unfortunately, considered point of view, I think there's more value to be had and more to be said about Deep Impact.
Deep Impact has more substance, that's the thing. It's more, I think Scott used the word, it's more considered. I maybe it was you, Chris, sorry, but because it's really focusing on how people would deal with that rather than it being flag-waving heroes going to save the day.
Yeah.
And it does happen a bit in the end with Robert Duvall.
Much better than in Armageddon.
Yeah, Robert Duvall sort of sacrificing himself, him and the crew.
Better acted, it's better written, it's better directed. Is this the only film on the list that has got a female director?
I think so.
I don't know if that causes not correlation or anything like that, but
no.
It's clearly on pretty much any level a better film. Perhaps a less fun film than Armageddon. Certainly the first time we watch it round, but I mean clearly it is in every other any criteria they have for it. It is better than Armageddon, and it certainly didn't deserve to be pasted. It's
far more interested in the human aspect of look what's going to happen when our species becomes almost extinct.
Yeah.
What are the ramifications of that then? But never mind, Bruce Willis in space with a nuke. Yeah.
It's because it doesn't go again. It's going to be something we'll talk about in a few films' time. In terms of creating an arc of sorts where you save the seeds and animals and things like that. Deep Impact gets it right. It's like it's all fairly believable how they would do it. Like, I think flying to an asteroid is the least believable part of it. It's something those films, I'm not sure that's feasible. But everything else, the preparation, expecting the tsunami, that sort of thing, is believable, and you just get invested in the character so much more.
Also, perhaps it does deliver by it is the archetype of the, as I mentioned earlier, "We will rebuild" speech from Morgan Freeman at the end in front of the ruined White House. That is very much the standard bearer for that kind of thing.
So, having stated that he wasn't that interested in doing more disaster work, it was 8 years before Roland Emmerich returned to the well with The Day After Tomorrow, which is at the time promised much and delivered very little. Actually, this is one of the ones I didn't really review in preparation for this, so I'm struggling.
If you want.
Well, I'm struggling to remember exactly what the turn of circumstance is.
There is not a lot of things to talk about.
Distressingly though, I didn't watch this again delivery, but I remember this far too well. I'm not happy about that at all.
I remember Jake Gyllenhaal hiding from wolves on a boat.
Yeah, that is
in the middle of a city.
The desperately tacked on bit of drama towards the end for no reason.
It's got your pal in it as well.
It's got Drew's favourite charisma vacuum, Dennis Quaid. as Jack Hall, a climatologist who becomes convinced of an ice age as a result of climate changes coming with inconceivable suddenicity. He tries to convince higher up on this, but they don't believe him until it's too late and the big freeze begins. Then he treks to New York over frozen ground to try and locate and rescue his kid, Sam, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, and that is your plot. That is essentially, there's nothing else of significance I think I have left out in a 2.5 hour film. Quaid continues his run of Blanadine lead performances, and while I've got quite a lot of time for a good proportion of the supporting cast like Gyllenhaal and Ian Holm, there is no human interest whatsoever in this film, and it's all about CG effects, which as spectacle perhaps have some merit. Some of the shots of the frozen New York have a kind of eerie quality to them, but only for about 30 seconds, and it's certainly nothing like enough to hang a whole film on. It's essentially a nice poster. It's got a couple of set pieces like the crashing of these RAF helicopters that are entirely tacked on. They have no place or position in the narrative whatsoever.
Do because we need to know where the Queen's a goner.
Well, they haven't got to the Queen yet, so we don't actually know if she died or not, but we can only just hope.
Well, I was going to say we can hope, yes.
Unless it's pretty good at stoking the fire at Balmoral.
Yeah, and I would normally let it slide in the genre, but the basis for these events is so preposterous that it deserves special mention, because even if you're trying to watch this for the spectacle alone, it is so incredibly stupid that it will drag you out of any sort of suspension of disbelief you have whatsoever, because the world essentially freezes instantly for some reason.
Is there these things called
ignoring all sorts of laws of thermodynamics,
supercells of cold air, which really sounds like a battery, a supercell. But, it does literally just freeze the planet like overnight. And it's ridiculous.
It is a big frozen CG showreel, which is, I suppose, what it was intended to be, but as a film, it is a garbage.
And also, that's that really stupid thing. I was like, Dennis Quaid, and at the cost of the lives of some of his colleagues, decides that what he should do is walk to New York to, given he's only going to get there, I'm not sure how he intends to aid his son. Jake Gyllenhaal's stuck in the New York public.
You'll worry about that when he gets there. Yeah, on foot.
I'm going to go and save him by going there to die with him. Okay. And then he gets to exactly the same time the rescue helicopters turn up anyways. Okay. That was worth my time. Thanks very much, Roland.
But you see, they wouldn't have went if they didn't know that there was survivors there, because they're heartless.
All I recall of this movie is feeling that it was just a massive, massive void with nothing much happening in it at all, spread over. It's 2 hours plus, right?
Oh,
Yeah, so there you go. My recollection of it was on that evidence is correct.
I mean, what baffles me to this day is, right, you have a film where so much has happened. You've frozen the entire northern hemisphere, and to get any sort of drama in the final reel, you have to have wolves escaping from a zoo and going on hunting people, because that's the obvious place to go when you have this sort of scenario.
There's also this thing at the end, though, and if it was another filmmaker, I think they would be making a political point, but because it's Roland Emmerich, I just don't think it is. But basically, they save the United States by decamping to Mexico, and Mexico just opens them with open arms instead of just saying, No. That's not how this works.
You're being unfair. That's not what happened. They did close the borders, but the president had to forgive all Latin American debt to let them back in. It was mentioned in passing on a newscast that I picked up. But it is addressed. You're doing a severe disservice to Roland Emmerich's canon of
Are you heeding these warnings, Mr. Trump?
Of course, this country that's now entirely frozen and doesn't have any economy can forgive these debtors and get into Mexico.
And crucially, all of the cash machines are iced up. Where is that?
Where is your God now?
Yeah, I just remember this is a bit of a vacuum, really, of drama, which when you consider the, as silly as the setup is, once you've executed that, then there's massive scope there for atmosphere and for peril, and my abiding memory of this is that it just did not deliver on any of it, and potentially the most disappointing of Roland Emmerich's entry into the disaster genre. There is probably one film which on a technical level is far worse from him. We'll be talking about that next. That's 2012, but at least it has the good grace to be so stupid it's entertaining.
I don't know. Yes, the 2012 is more just so stupid. It's the stupidest thing that I've ever heard in my entire life. Okay. The thing about something like Day After Tomorrow too is that from the perspective of a much smaller film, there's an idea of something that could work. Like the people stuck in the library, it's frozen, they're isolated, the resources are dwindling.
Mm-hmm.
You can focus on them and the interactions, maybe the infighting, backstabbing, anything like that. That could be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But no, wolves.
Oh, I thought we were on to 2012 now.
No, I was just finishing up on the day after tomorrow,
right,
which is why I said something about the day after tomorrow.
Yes, no, that's what I was zoned out entirely. I'm like, oh, wait,
Thanks
you're still talking about that. That's all right. You feel free to carry on talking about a different film than I've introduced. 2012.
I hadn't finished talking before you introduced it.
Lads, we don't need to fight about this.
Oh,
But it'd be funny, so go ahead.
2012.
Yes, 2012. As I said, the stupidest thing I've
Seamless.
ever seen, I think, because the planet is in danger of tumultuous earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanic eruptions because the fundamental nature of the physics of the entire universe goes wrong. It's basically the grandest scale disaster movie you can think of in that regard. But for those who don't know, right?
The only way this is going to work is if we posit it in an alternate universe.
In 2012, a scientist, played by Jimmy Mystery, basically gets on a plane from Washington DC in the middle of the night to fly to Calcutta to find out some information that he could have been delivered with over the phone. To say, apparently, in their detector for neutrinos deep underground, they found that the neutrinos, a fundamental particle of the universe that are completely immutable, have mutated. And
that's what they do. I like
because the neutrinos have mutated, they are now making the planet's core hotter, which is making the planet lose its basically. And there's volcanoes, there's tsunamis, there are earthquakes.
All bets are off.
Everything is rolled into one.
If we can't trust physics.
All because the neutrinos are mutating. However, despite the fact that this is the apparent cause of it, they're never mentioned again at any point during the film. And
there's no concern that this mutation might be ongoing. And there's
by the end of the film, they've apparently stopped heating up the planet and they've gone back to normal. It was just a strange weekend for them or something.
No, that's it. They just had a bit of a hangover from a big party they were at.
So in this scenario of a world gone mad, John Cusack is running about being chased by lava, because it's not a disaster film, it's a chase movie in which he spends the entire film running away, driving away and flying away from lava. Lava that in every single instance without fail speeds up depending on his movement.
It's like rubber band physics. It's like Mario Kart.
Yeah.
The lava is mutating.
It's not even a joke too. If you watch, and he gets into a car, he drives away, it speeds up.
Yeah.
He's in a plane that the lava's reached the edge of the runway. It's like a desperate race to a plane with his family. He gets in the plane takes off, and the lava speeds up. So what he should have tried to do is just fool the lava by walking very slowly, or standing still and calling his bluff. And like, look over there.
So basically, it was the inspiration for the game Braid, wasn't it? That's the same mechanic.
Pretty much. Pretty much. The thing about 2012 is that it tries to take the same human interest and societal commentary that Deep Impact used, but meld it with the effect spectacle of Armageddon. But unfortunately, in melding it with the effect spectacle of Armageddon, they also accidentally brought along all of the stupidity. Only now, there's not an average scene length of 5 seconds to propel things apace. It is quite simply the most baffling of the movies on this list. None of it makes any sense. This is the first time I had seen it. I'd caught parts of it on television a few years ago, I think, when it first aired on TV. I never really watched it. So the first time I sat down and watched it properly from start to finish was in preparation for this podcast about a month ago. And I am none the wiser now. Honestly, it made as much sense to me having watched it about than just a random 10-minute segment of it made then. I was aware of the neutrinos mutating meme and whatnot, obviously. I thought, it can't possibly be that. The rest of the movie can't possibly be that stupid. Oh, it is. So drowning in CG as well, the whole movie, and very strange. It's a lot of that CG work's got that slightly too hyper-real, sort of uncanny valley CG look about it, but it's just not quite convincing.
And that horrible light too.
Yeah, it lends a real sort of surreal quality to it.
Is that sort of like, it's like the whole film's in HDR or something like that?
It's
all for me. It's always that light. There's something weird about the light in that.
Yeah, especially the eruption stuff, and like when when they're trying to escape from when the Yellowstone Park or whatever blows its top. That stuff, with the volcanic outspurts and whatnot. It's just a really, really bizarre and ill-conceived film, and unfortunately squanders any sort of hope of gravitas and social commentary that I think it would probably set out to try and deliver, thoroughly sacrificed upon the altar of complete and utter stupidity. But there you go.
I'll say this for Emmerich, he breaks things quickly. In Earthquake, you're still being introduced to characters at the 40-minute mark, and in this film, he's dropped the entire western seaboard of the United States into the sea.
Yeah.
Thus, finally fulfilling Lex Luthor's dreams.
Yes. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Just get on with it.
Like a lot of these things, the first time I watched it was last week, and by the time I went to make notes a couple of days later, I'd already forgotten why this disaster thing started off.
Yeah.
And it was sunspots causing neutrinos to mutate or something. That's but fine, that'll do.
I remember the neutrino bit, but I'd be hard pushed to tell you now what any of the motivations of any of the characters were, or any of the other incidental stuff happening.
No.
How it arose. Almost pointless, the arc stuff and whatnot. You probably could have excised that from the end of it. We should just have made it about John Cusack's character.
Yeah.
It's a bizarre, bloated mess.
Well, this is just a bit like Armageddon too. They basically have no warrant this is going to happen, then construct these arcs overnight.
Yeah.
Basically, it's
that's the Chinese for you, isn't it? Quick.
The only thing that is, I think, of any lasting historical merit is I think it's probably the peak of destruction that you'll see in a film.
That's what I was going to say. It's again raising the stakes, movie on movie. The only option available to Emmerich, and this is just it just has to be everything happening at once, basically.
Yeah, because then you end up there's only the Himalayas are basically above water. I'm not sure where all this water comes from, because I don't think there's that much water on the planet.
I'm pretty sure we have to abide with the water that's already here, right? Yeah. We can't multiply it.
The only way to go for it is to actually have a disaster film that destroys the planet. Because otherwise, you flooded the entire thing. You've basically made it like Genesis, the Bible. But
plus, I think now that superhero movies have taken over the mantle of destroying landmarks, that's the other sort of linchpin of the disaster genre that's been taken away from them now. So there's now probably not really much of a reason to make any more disaster movies, because we've already got the Golden Gate Bridge being destroyed by Magneto 19 times and all these kind of things. So. We may never see its likes again, and I'm not actually all that sad
we've come so far
on this grand scale. I think
we've come so far now that actually you have the Golden Gate Bridge not being destroyed as an act of subversion.
Plot point,
in Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams reboot, it's like you're sure that the Golden Gate Bridge is going to be destroyed, and no, they dropped the drilling device next to it instead. So.
Yeah, that's it. A sort of bystanders just stand about looking, go, would you look at that? I thought that'd be the first to go. Well, I never. Okay, so let's talk about San Andreas then. If we must. We probably should. None of us wants to talk about San Andreas. For me, listen, I'm a fairly big fan of Dwayne Johnson. I find him quite charismatic.
He's very watchable.
He's in a lot of rubbish, but he's very likeable.
He's woefully underused. And when the guy's given decent material to work with, he's engaging, he's charismatic, he's a really likeable presence.
Yep.
Yeah.
It should be hard to see past the man's physique. But he's capable of delivering that.
Yeah.
He's not just a block of meat. Unfortunately, in San Andreas, he is just a block of meat. A bizarrely, it's not even bizarrely conceived film. It's a film which takes so many tropes and steadfastly refuses to put any kind of spin onto them. Any kind of modern reinterpretation of the disaster genre you were hoping for will be woefully abandoned, because if anything, this is less cohesive than something like Earthquake, which is obviously the film it's aiming to, or in which in theme it's closest to. Anybody want to offer some?
Well, first of all, like most of these disaster movies don't need to set up, but it's like the San Andreas fault is cracking, which it's been known to do.
Yeah, it happens.
And then there are two things going on at the same time. One is that Paul Giamatti and his colleagues, he's a seismologist, have been poor Paul Giamatti. Yeah, he doesn't deserve this. He's far too good an actor.
This is his one for the studio light.
Yeah.
And delivered with all the enthusiasm. And
so
bless him. He's no. Come on, Paul Giamatti actually makes a real effort in this, and he really does. But do you know what? Paul Giamatti, I don't think is capable of not making a certain effort.
Yeah.
But he sticks out like a sore thumb in this. You feel sorry for him in every scene, but I digress.
Yeah, so Paul Giamatti and his colleagues are investigating whether they can predict earthquakes. Okay, they've detected some sort of magnetic disturbance before an earthquake, which is okay. Apparently, at the beginning of this film, because it changes later on, at the beginning of this film, this technology enables them to predict an earthquake in advance by about a good 10 or 12 seconds. Because, literally, seconds after discovering that their theory is correct, a massive earthquake starts that they had no warning of, so it proves it isn't correct. But
and what are the odds of that?
A massive earthquake strikes San Andreas fault, destroys the Hoover Dam, and this begins a massive series of earthquakes in California. And what then happens is that the prediction technology then starts working when it's convenient, so that they can predict that there will be another bigger earthquake in San Francisco, that also the San Andreas fault connects with another larger
immediately undiscovered fault.
A previously undiscovered fault deeper into Nevada and Colorado, I think, and California as well, that will all link up and possibly drop the entire western seaboard of the United States into the sea. Does that sound familiar? In amongst this, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, is a rescue pilot who is basically, as Craig mentioned, a hunk of meat, because he's at some point able to rescue someone by tearing the door off of a car.
Yeah.
Well, of course, yes.
He is that strong.
And his daughter gets trapped in an earthquake in San Francisco, and he does something similar to Dennis Quaid in The Day After Tomorrow, but with actual being able to effect some change. Decides to head north to
actually
rescue.
Using a sensible mode of transport once or twice.
And he's actually able to do something. I mean, there's some merit here in that there's the fact there's some characters with some competence is quite appealing.
That did appeal to me quite a lot, because he's competent, he's doing not so stupid things, as is his wife, as is his kid, as
his
is
daughter in
the
particular.
The boy that he meets.
So, it's supposed to be teenage girl in the way of most American films. She's probably 35.
It was something like 29 or something when they filmed it.
Yeah, but so his daughter, because he's prepared her, she's not the damsel in distress in the same way. She
displays some degree of resourcefulness.
Calm, competent, knows what she's doing, and doesn't panic. So that there are good points.
That's to be lauded. Yeah.
Dwayne Johnson, he's a sort of, I was going to say believable in the role, maybe not, but sort of fairly calm influence. It's not a great role for him, but in this role, it's sensible mode of transport. You say, Craig, it's all got it going for it in terms of like the character makes sense. Nobody's panicking. There's an earthquake. Okay, but then it just keep turning the ante up every time. And for some reason, I saw this in the cinema and thought it was quite good. And
I'm sorry.
I forgot to take my brain that day, because I rewatched a couple of weeks ago. Everything about this film is terrible. I'll say a couple of examples, because what I decided to do is I really just want to tear into it now, because it's ridiculously stupid.
Even my mum and dad laughed at this film.
Can I just give one example before we go all negative? Because I thought this was actually going to do something mildly clever at the start, because it's got and it's a cast for the most part that I quite like. Not just Paul Giamatti, but exactly Ian Griffith is what we're talking about, but even other guys like a journalist in it, Archie Punjabi, who's not really in a lot of films, but she's really good in The Good Wife. She's actually a good actress. Not in this, obviously. But I thought they were going to do something clever with Ian Griffith's character, because he's a stepdad, and for once at the start, he wasn't being a sleazeball. He seemed quite reasonable and all these kind of things. So, good, they're not going down that route. And then they very much go down that route. And I thought, maybe at the start, okay, right, fine, he's seen something shocking happen right in front of him, and I thought maybe he just went into shock, and that's why he abandoned this girl. He abandoned his boy. And I thought maybe that's doing it, but no, then from that moment on, he descends into an absolute cartoon villain. He might as well be twiddling his moustache at that point. Absolutely ludicrous.
The bit where he rips the guy away from his cover at the wall and
throws it.
Space. MySpace isn't even a thing anymore.
Yes.
There's so there's some problems here. You think it starts out okay, and like there's some prediction technology which changes pace during the film, but okay, so that means they can approach it with it. It's not just everybody's going to die. You can approach it slightly differently. The Rock is competent. His daughter's competent. You have Paul Giamatti, who's just this reassuring presence when he's going on TV trying to warn people. Okay. But it's like, so all the other little details, it just drove me crazy. Like,
and the big details, like plot.
I mean, like, and such ham-fisty things like, hello, I am building the tallest building in the city of San Francisco, and it's going to be very strong. Pay attention, this will be important later. So signposting stuff like that. It's got
But what would happen if there's an earthquake? Well, I was specifically saying...
Who's to say there's going to be
Who's
an
to say
earthquake?
there will be one? Exactly.
Then you have, in California, where earthquakes are common, they still have a scene where Paul Giamatti basically yells to everyone who's standing around when an earthquake begins, get into cover, at which point they go, oh, we should get into cover then. Well, they need to be told these things. Then
Paul Giamatti does spend most of the remainder of this film just basically, every time a tremor comes, shouting at people, quick, get under a table.
Yes.
50% of his screen time is spent just curled up under a table.
I think it was more of a kind of public service announcement. He's just trying to train people for earthquake awareness. I think that's probably what it is.
Duck and cover.
And it's got sort of just such naff dialogue too. Like people, I think it's Paul Giamatti's giving it actually, saying, you've got to tell people of San Francisco that they're going to get hit. Not, there will be an earthquake. They're going to get hit. You're missing important words there.
You've forgotten how humans talk.
And there are just some really dodgy bits of CGI later on too. It's a big earthquake in San Francisco, and the pavement splits apart, and some of the worst CGI I've seen in quite some time actually by modern standards. Also, while this is the second earthquake in San Francisco, right, subways apparently still running, and also run just 1 meter below the pavement. Subway is only 1 meter below the road, and despite being in an earthquake hit city with no electricity, it's still running when the pavement breaks open and it spews the train out. Okay. And the other thing, because the second time I watched it, my brain was actually switched on this time, and I was just getting driven crazy by it. Right, well, we need to create some more drama here. San Francisco's already bad enough, but what would be really bad? Well, a tsunami. But tsunamis are caused by earthquakes at sea, which force the water inland.
Outward from the epicenter.
Yes, this earthquake happened in San Francisco, but apparently...
It generated a tsunami out to sea that travelled inward.
Yes. I say it wasn't just me that picked up on that, thank you.
Oh my God, it's an inverse tsunami.
I wasn't... Honestly, I'd switched off at that point. It was a long time before I cottoned on. I thought to myself, I knew there was something bugging me. But honestly, my faculties had been deadened by this point, and it takes a lot for me in this genre to be that removed from any interest in the film. I'd watched the first half of it when my parents were down visiting last time, and then I was absolutely shattered because of the kids, so I ended up going, right, okay, I need to get some sleep. I'll watch the other half. I'll watch the last hour of this, and they sat and watched the remainder of it because they'd wanted to see it. And when I asked, they'd been laughing their asses off anyway. I asked them in the morning, does it pick up at all? No. I watched it anyway. I felt like I owed it to you guys. And so much happens that just defies belief. And I was sitting watching it, and it was registering that there's something wrong with this. And it was probably a couple of hours later I went, wait a minute. How is this tsunamis happen again? The crazy thing about it is they set up, in order to sort of explain away the magnitude of the earthquake, right? They set up this whole thing of, is it the interlinking faults and whatnot, and the rest of it, right? But the rest of the movie is so scientifically inept and ridiculous that why did you bother going to that effort? Anyway, just tell people that the San Andreas fault of its own accord would cause an earthquake of that magnitude. Yes. It might not be capable of it, but you obviously don't care about the science of the rest of it enough. So why have you felt the need to go into some detail of invoking previously unknown fault lines to explain away the size of the... You clearly think we're that stupid anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one final bit at the end, and it's really minor in the scheme of things, but it just, by that point, I was just picking holes in everything. I was like, because they were huge and really easy to do. But at the end, there's like a refugee camp set up in San Francisco. It's clearly later that day, after the tsunami and after the rock has rescued his daughter, right? But there's already this fence covered in posters of people looking for missing people and stuff. And by this point, I'm just like, But where the hell did they get the printers and the ink and the electricity to run them? There was a tsunami 2 hours ago. That bit was just daft. That was annoying me because
how quickly the relief materials got there. But then I thought to myself, well, it's probably been John Travolta's flown it in on his own jumbo jet, right? That's what happens in the event of these things. John Travolta's the first on the scene, first responder with his big plane. It's a really bafflingly inept film. Just one of those silly movies where everything is ratcheted up to 11 and everything will collapse the very second the character manages to finally break themselves free of something. The jeopardy is designed to have us on the edge of our seat throughout the film, but it's just so overwrought on every single occasion. Everything that can collapse will collapse at exactly the speed required for someone just to get in. It's just scene after scene after scene after scene. But there'll be a sequel, you say, Scott?
I was looking at the IMDb page the other day, and it does appear that Dwayne Johnson signed up for something called San Andreas 2, which I assume is a sequel to this. Otherwise, it is a puzzlingly titled film.
Oh, that's what I wanted to say. The other bizarre setup thing as well that made no sense to me, because I assumed there was going to have to be some payoff. It's set up earlier in the film that Dwayne Johnson's character, he did have 2 daughters and one of them died in a drowning accident.
Yes.
And later on in the film, his remaining daughter is placed in a similar jeopardy, and we think she might not make it and that this is going to be a recurring thing. Now, I assumed that at some point in his helicopter there was going to be some payoff for that scene at the start of the film where he explained he's going to do that crazy manoeuvre in the helicopter called tipping the hat.
Yes.
That's so obviously signposted. I thought, well, all right, I know what's going to happen now. There's going to be a bit at the end of the movie where he's in some sort of bizarre circumstance and he's going to have to be in his helicopter and he's going to have to tip the hat, isn't he?
Nope.
It's this crazy maverick maneuver. It's never mentioned again, which begs the question, why was it necessary in the first place? Because there was enough jeopardy involved in that scene at the beginning. There was no need for the overhang for the helicopter for him to have to do this crazy maneuver. It wouldn't have put the people in the accident in any more jeopardy than they already were. It wouldn't have negated any of the crazy stuff that he has to do to prove to us that he's a great guy and a big hero. It was a really strange thing. It stuck out so much that I thought, well, that's an obvious plot point. That's a very silly thing, but clearly tipping the hat is going to be, there's going to be a callback to that later in the film. There's going to be a big dramatic moment where he looks at someone and says, I'm going to have to tip the hat. And it never happens. It never happens. There you go. That and the tsunami bothered me more than anything, but there's a lot to be bothered by in this film. That it took so much money, I don't know what that says about audiences. I can't.
No, nothing good.
I'm assuming to take as much money as it did, people must have gone back to see it multiple times. I don't know, but I can't understand why that would be. But yeah, San Andreas, it was a thing that happened, and apparently it happened in order to regress the genre by decades. Nice. So we've had, again, as with our last podcast, we've had some nice feedback from guys online, some comments. Scott, you've got to hand.
A couple, we did ask people what their favourite disaster movies are, and a few we mentioned as we go along. A few I missed was our friend Matt Toller on the Twitters, at M Toller, who hopes that Deep Impact gets a mention. He has a soft spot for it, even though it's not the greatest, and of course we kind of feel the same way. Also, our similar feelings are shared on the same film by Tengushi on Twitter, at Tengushi, who also is a fan of that one in particular, and he also mentions Deep Rising, which I actually can't think of what that is off the top of my head.
That's the one with Treat Williams and Famke Janssen, which is on board the ocean liner that is attacked by deep sea aliens.
So
bit of genre confusion going on there, I think.
Yes, but there's a few. I suppose it's not actually all that dissimilar from us talking about Independence Day.
No,
so
exactly.
Talking about that. And I think the other one I've got here is Movie Geekcast, at Movie Geekcast, their podcast, of course. And some of their favourites are, well, we mentioned both Armageddon and Twister we've covered. We wouldn't really call them favourites as far as what we've said. Also an interesting one, Children of Men, which is not, I would classify it as not a disaster, but it's certainly a really good film. It's more one of these films that is the aftermath of the disaster, and it's more of a conspiracy.
If it could have been justified in inserting it into this podcast, it would have been by far and away the leader of the pack in terms of quality. That's an objectively great movie, regardless of your preference. But yes, no, thank you very much for your feedback, guys. Always appreciated. We also had a special shout out to Erica, who we mentioned earlier, for the Swarm Right, for leaving a very nice comment on our Facebook page.
Indeed. Yep.
Which was very, very much appreciated. That was really lovely. Obviously, if any of you want to get in touch, we are available by pretty much all forms of social media these days. We don't have a MySpace page, but you can reach us on Facebook, on Twitter, or on SoundCloud. If you do feel like doing so, you can support us greatly by going to iTunes and leaving us a review. Nobody ever does that, but we had some recently.
Yes, I know there's 2 more since the last shout-outs, which, remiss of me, I don't have to hand, but I will certainly thank you very much, and we'll give you a proper shout-out next time we record.
Yeah, that seems fair enough.
Intermission episode.
Thank you very much for that. It's always appreciated. And I guess all that remains for me is to say thank you very much for listening. I was Craig, Scott was Scott.
Bye-bye.
And Drew was inimitably... What's your name again? Brian.
Bye-bye.
Pyroclastic Brian.